I was ordered by my philosopher guide, Honorable Professor Wani, that you have to come out with your views on such and such topic. So I submit hereby my compliance to your orders and directions in the form of a topic that has been coined and framed by my philosopher guide, and that is Principal Universal Foundations for Just and Across the Board Treatment of Refugees to Attain Global Peace. It is very, very important to understand the dynamics, semantics, dimensions, ramifications, implications of one particular word, and that is peace. It is immensely difficult to define peace. I would not be touching those particular aspects which have already been articulated by Honorable Professor Wani Sahib, but I would be making certain important dimensions for your understanding. Rather, I am here to agitate, galvanize, and rejuvenate with certain important juridical, judicial, and justicial tweets. When I see peace, and again, I am immensely influenced by my philosopher guide, I perceive peace is a pilgrimage to troubled territories, and refugee migration is a migration for peace. Biblically speaking, refugee exodus is driven by peace, and they are set on the path of peace as the ambassadors of peace in search of peace. Refugees locate peace in transcontinental terrains, intercontinental spaces, and transnational lands, and they are always away from their roots, origins, and belongings. Primarily, refugees are dispossessed of right to have rights in transcendental terra firma and constitutional magnum opus in the geopolitical entities of belongers and non-belongers alike. Refugees have been waving and vouching for the attainment of global peace as a part of their across-the-board treatment based on the principal universal foundation of justice. The perception about refugees has been too often of them being a liability on society, but they have been never regarded as an asset to the world community. In the reception countries, the refugees have been perceived as a threat to national integrity, internal security, and political stability. And it's a wrong premise. Rather, they confront hostile environments in the country of destinations and country of receptions. Thus, refugee policies invariably of all countries do not envision any space for their services in the nation building projects. However, history of refugee migration is replete with examples of their enriching the civilizations, science, and humanities of the host nation states and communities. And in this presentation of mine, I strive to locate the principal universal foundation for just and across the board treatment of refugees to attain global peace. And therefore, I try to argue, my dear friends, about the centrality of the peace-induced mobility of refugees that makes the right to peace as an umbrella right, whereunder all collateral associated vicarious and incidental rights of refugees could be accomplished consistent with the refugee vices. Humanity finds a spell at the trial and tribulation of unprecedented magnitude since its inception. War and conflict have gripped the humanity from continent to continent, from region to region, and from country to country, where persecution of peoples based on their caste, creed, ethnicity, gender, and social origin race, religion, region, and political opinion remained unabated and continued to be made exacerbated. Massive violations of human rights, aggression, generalized violence, foreign occupation, domestic discrimination, economic exclusion produced vertical divisions between rich and poor that will continue to make Afghans, Baloch, Chakma, Pashtun, and Sri Lankans, particularly in South Asia, Hazaras and Uzbeks in Central Asia, Rohingya in Southeast Asia, Iraqis, Kurdish, and Palestinians in Middle East and Far East, Congolese, Liberians, Somalis, and Sudanese in Africa. These are the vulnerable and victimized groups of refugees. However, Chechens, Roma, Montagnards, and Asylees displacements in Euro-Asia region have further precipitated the refugee crisis. There are many countries grappling with internally displaced persons and climate refugees as well, who are outside the protection framework of international refugee law. The persecution puts refugees in a state of denial and deprivation of basic security and safety in their country of nationality or in their home or country of origin. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, refugees cannot be prevented from being refugees to refuge. They have the right to have rights such as the right to leave and right to return under international law, as it has been adumbrated under the two important articles of the Universal Declarations of Human Rights, that is Article 13 and 14. And I perceive Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a minimum continuum of normative understanding at global level. The contemporary international refugee protection framework is confronted with twofold challenge. For example, national security narrative, where host state benefits, interests, and responsibilities are generally deciphered, and the human rights narrative, where we are confronted with the individual rights, including the right to return, where the identity, diversity, and socio-economic progress is generally contested. Today, the 1951 UN Convention relating to the status of refugees that my honorable guide has already pointed out in his keynote remarks, that constitutes as a pillar of international refugee protection framework that is a more balanced but less diversified in the present circumstances. Though to a very great extent, this diversity has also been addressed by adopting in 2016 at New York, that is popularly known as the New York Declaration on Refugees and Migrants. Refugee rights, or more comprehensively speaking, human rights are the clothes and cloaks of civility, dignity, and humanity, envisioned in all the national constitutions and international law instruments across the delocalizing and decolonizing world for establishing human nobility, human equality, and human majesty. Refugees are everywhere, my dear friends. Refugees, they are in origins, in transitions, in transmigration, in retransmigration, in destinations, in reception, in repatriation, in resettlement, and in reintegration, and in assimilation since the pre-socio-political human existentialism. The moment, if you take into account the current scenario of displaced or forcibly displaced people, then I find by the end of the 2019, officially speaking, there are 79 million refugees. But this kind of, population has accentuated further the indispensable international attention to the paucity of the global humanitarian system. There are questions like, how does forced migration look different if we examine it through a historical peace perspective? And there is also a second important question. How have refugees been historical actors of peace as well as victims? I try to examine the dynamics of peace that illuminate our understanding of peace in the context of refugees instead of indulging in the political game of attributing, naming, renaming human displacement in the settings of historical entanglements between migration, mobility, colonialism, race, and borders. Ladies and gentlemen, 21st century planet Earth has become planet refugees, as my honorable sir has already pointed out. Refugees suffer from rightlessness, and the 1951 UN Convention relating to the status of refugees is also going to complete in the month of September this year 70 years of its existence. As it has already been put in the public domain, the UN Refugee Convention is an outcome of Second World War, and it was primarily meant for the European refugees resettlement and settlement because of in the aftermath of the Second World War, there was a lot of intra-European migration. These two wars were imposed on global South nation states against their will, as they were the colonies of these so-called civilized nations of the global North, whose barbarity and brutality were in full display during these two important wars. These wars were nothing but the sinister projects of their expansionist and imperialist interest for plundering and pulverizing each other. Global North interest cannot be construed as global South interest against utter disregard to equality of peoples. International institutions have been deliberately headquartered in the geopolitical settings of global North nation states with a view to destabilize the national governments of global South nation states while executing the policy of the forced regime change if their national and imperial interests are not served against the popular will of the peoples of these regions. Consequently, peace was the biggest casualty of these European misadventures that perpetrated inhumanity against humanity. Refugee exodus and paramountcy of peace cannot sustain together. Refugees are in quest of planet peace, ladies and gentlemen, because peace is infallible, indelible, and inalienable for human sustainability and refugeehood that derails and destabilizes the same and is presently sandwiched between belongers and non-belongers, or what we call between natives and non-natives. Refugee voices are the voices of peace and aspire for tranquility under the transcendentalism of structural justice in all geopolitical narratives, foreign policy imperatives, and international responsibility sharing enterprises. The sociality, politicality, culturality, and economics of peace remain volatile since its inception. Peace is a mirage that gestates, ladies and gentlemen, a 22-catch syndrome that remains shrouded in amorphousness and fluidity worldwide. However, peace has been recognized as a concomitant element of human existence. It is also axiomatic from the fact that in the name of peace, many national and international awards and laurels have also been instituted. So far, my individual understanding, because what I have heard yesterday in this conference, what kind of a theoretical constructs have been shared, I am deviating from those constructions. Because I perceive peace as the democracy of human remedies consistent with the social, cultural, political, legal, and religious preferences and priorities in all geopolitical entities. Peace activism has become the core concern of major conflicts and tensions affecting nation states, societies, communities, groups, and identities across the world. However, peace does not have any definition, and I see the idea of not defining peace as some kind of a blessing in disguise. Because we cannot determine the province of peace. However, peace has an explanation. Sometimes it's a collectivized, explanation. Sometimes it's highly individualized explanation. Anything that does not disturb individual or collective mental sensitivity, stability, and continuity, known as an indication of peace. Peace has different meanings for different people, individuals, and groups. For example, refugees do not want to be refugees. Workers want to return to their dwellings, and professionals want to get back to their families. Citizens and subjects equally want to access and enjoy entire congeries and compendium of fundamental human rights and human freedoms. Therefore, peace is a perception that problematizes its constructs, connects, and context based on diversity, multiculturalism, pluralism, liberalism, Marxism, secularism, and racism. People perceive peace and take refuge in its multiple structures of interpretation and seek sanctuaries in its intersectionalities of identities. Peace is not confined to a single manifestation, my dear friends. Rather, it is reflected in the lives of the people's ideological indoctrination, governance, affiliation, and gender orientation. In the context of refugees, the presence of a single refugee anywhere in the world is a testimony that there is no peace. Same line of argument has also been alluded by Honorable Professor Wani. To substantiate peace, then there is a question how to substantiate, how to approbate the idea of peace. There is a need, if we are really interested to make a substantiation of peace, then there is a need to negate refugeehood. Peace needs a world free from refugees, in other words, because refugeehood is an outcome of a clash of contradictions, predilections of political primacy, and conflict between cults and cocktails of governance structures of all hues within the ad hominem, away from the global constitutionalism, international liberalism, and structural judicialism. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, an inherent principle, universal foundation for just and across the board treatment of refugees is the idea of transcendental institutionalism to attain global peace. And this is how I try to locate the foundations of peace for a comprehensive treatment of refugees. Therefore, we have to see refugees through new eyes, innovative lenses or lens, and novel prisms in an environment of narcissistic nationalism, xenophobia campaign, and jingoistic majoritarianism. In case of refugees, nation states are deeply troubled and they govern in ways that seem under the influence of dark forces, and disinformation becomes part of the everyday life and allows all sorts of explanations to flourish. Refugees are the victims of extremism, violence, and political divide, spearheaded by the state-patronized extra-constitutional institutions against liberalism. In abbreviation, you may call it SPACIAL. who have attained the status of deep state in many global north and global south nation states. However, few nation states can handle refugee exoduses, and so many states affirm falsehoods for the sake of achieving a spacious clarity about their political agenda, or at least convert refugee reception into congenial forms of peace politics, a dynamic that explains the rise of cultic thinking in the contemporary time and the spread of extremist versions of religious teachings. One variant of this particular phenomenon that has gained salience during the recent far-right anti-minority elements, in abbreviation, I call it FRAME. In many nation states that supposedly has been playing a pernicious role against refugees. Therefore, the peace norms of international law are being subverted by the unelected bureaucrats in many geopolitical entities. International liberal order advocates the harmonization of political divide with international rendering of global peace that has been envisioned in the preamble to the UN Charter. However, the sharp divisions of race and ethnicity, class in the global geopolitical society explain much of the confusion surrounding this dangerously imprecise terminology of deep state, within inverted commas, as I have put it. It is crudely used by polarized adversaries to identify hidden forces that are regarded as the marionettes manipulating the puppets, which have been invariably prefixed or suffixed in all the preambles of the world constitutions at international level, whether it is the constitutions from the South Asian region, whether it is the Southeast Asian national constitutions, or magistically speaking, whether it is the Constitution of United States of America. These words have really been abused to a very great extent. But if we see another important development in the progressive development of international law, as my philosopher guide has already pointed out, and I should not provide you or expose you to any kind of a platitude, but I would take only a few seconds on this particular development as well, though he has already pointed it out when he was talking of 1945. San Francisco Conference on 24th of October, when United Nations Charter was adopted by the world community, and initially only 50 or 51 nation states happened to be there as the original signatories. The establishment of the United Nations through the UN Charter, wherein the idea of peace and human dignity was envisioned, which was an unprecedented watershed in the history of humanity. In the post-2 world wars, the world community resolved through the UN Charter to safeguard successive generations or succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which had brought incalculable miseries to humankind, reposing faith in fundamental human rights and human freedoms with dignity and to worth of human person. The international community of nation states resolved to establish conditions to promote social progress and better living standards in more extensive freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, those who drafted the Charter of the United Nations had in mind the painful memories of the generalized violence and mass sufferings and called upon the signatories to save posterity from the scourge of war. The drafter asked the United Nations to help achieve international cooperation in solving international problems of an economic, social, cultural, or humanitarian character. And if you take into account the characteristics of these, prefixes, or in the form of, adjectives, they belong to refugees. And therefore, One of the first issues on the agenda of the United Nations was the fate of refugees, displaced persons, stateless persons, and returnees or asylum seekers. Because all the classes of displacement, all have been uprooted by war and need humanitarian assistance. The problem of refugees was clearly both international and humanitarian in character. If we take some kind of a historical account of refugee assistance, then we also come across that entire history of refugee protection gyrates around the idea of peace. Evolution of modern law on refugee protection traces its roots to early experiences in providing safety to wayfaring strangers via institutions such as Ijara and Aman amongst Muslim communities. It has already been pointed out, even the Sulh Hudaybiyah was a treaty of peace. And on the other side of the argument, it is the sanctuary in Judeo-Christian traditions. Before turning to the League of Nations, which established the first High Commissioner for Russian refugees, and eventually the United Nations and its 1951 UN Convention. No one would be surprised to learn that the International Committee of Red Cross was the initiator of the international protection system set up by the League of Nations. Since the Peace Treaty of Westphalia of 1648, the refugee regime has evolved with our modern state or the current regime, reflecting changes in international law, politics, economics, notions of ideology, and balance of power. Since the early religious and political persecutions of the Huguenots, then the aristocrats of the French Revolution, more comprehensive refugee regime finally emerged under the auspices of the League of Nations after the Second World War or the First World War. The regime that has evolved immediately after the First World War responded to circumstances undergoing dramatic changes during the interwar period, as well as in the post-Second World War scenario that has created a permanent framework to cope with the refugee problem through the United Nations Commissioner for Refugees. Further, the Cold War had an overwhelming influence on the norms and policies of this regime, and in the post-Cold War era, the regime has had to reflect global concerns. The nation-states began to respond to refugees in a cooperative manner soon after the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. And this peace treaty has also played an important role in rendering notions of refuge and asylum into an understandable form within the then emergent European state system. Honorable Professor Wani has already pointed out that has attracted my attention as well. And let me put his narrative in my own words. He alluded that the institution of asylum is the most important institution when we are talking of peace at global level. Because it is the institution of asylum. And asylum seekers seek in the name of asylum, primarily they are desperate to have peace. But unfortunately, the institution of asylum has become the highly controversial, polemical, and abused institution in the entire human rights framework. However, the nation states began to respond to the institution of asylum. And the Treaty of Westphalia of 1648 did this by affirming a basic right for emigration by those wishing to leave their own state because their religion differed from that of their prince or their rulers.
Okay.
This right was listed.
No. We need to conclude it now. Huh? Okay.
Sure, sir.
Okay.
Give me a few seconds, sir. The Treaty of Peace, if you take into account, it basically contemplated a very, very important right, a right of jus emigrandi. It means right to emigrate with one's own personal property. Here, in the next, 1 minute, I'm going to conclude my submissions, or less than a minute. Though I have prepared, sir, a full-fledged paper as per your directions. But one of the most important aspects of today's deliberations still remains to be eluded, and that is how to identify the foundations and fundamental principle, what we call, or universal foundations in the context of refugees. I'm not going to touch upon those fundamental principles which have already been pointed out and articulated by Honorable Professor in his keynote address of this morning. The principal universal foundations of peace for just and across the board treatment of refugees could epistemologically be adumbrated, in my understanding, that it is the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter, number one. Number two, the majesty of human rights and fundamental human freedoms. Number three, independence, indivisibility, inalienability, and impartiality of human rights application. Ethical, existential, and ontological dimensions related to refugees, asylum seekers, migrants, stateless people, internally displaced persons, an entire population that constitute human displacement. Ethics of political membership and immigration, sovereignty and the ethics of exclusion, religious ethics on hospitality and the idea of welcoming the stranger, gender, race, and disability as categories of the global exclusion, the ethics of humanitarianism, algorithmic humanitarianism, and humanitarian repression, theoretical works on political membership, democracy, and the basis for inclusion and exclusion, the right to belong and right to asylum, non-refoulement and non-discrimination. Though there are some important aspects that is still, on some other occasions, definitely I would be sharing, but since it is going to be published, so I would also be, making a full-fledged, presentation and sending this presentation to the Honorable Professor. But let me conclude it, my dear friends, though there is a list of, suggestions as well as other important imperatives and enterprises which require global attention to realize global peace. But before I conclude, let me give in a nutshell that when we are studying international law and particularly the international human rights law framework, then I see the language of human rights is the language of peace. UN Charter, let me define one by one in another 5 seconds. UN Charter is a congeries of peace, including its declaration of right to peace. Under international refugee law, non-refoulement is the peace, as the human body, and my learned professor has already equated it. Under international human rights law framework, dignity is peace. Under international humanitarian law, distinction is peace. Under comparative constitutional law, democracy of human rights is peace. Under customary international law, just cogence is peace. Under international criminal law, fair trial is peace. Under comparative international law, non-discrimination is peace. And these various manifestations are available to refugees as well. And this is how we should try to achieve global peace. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you, Professor Dr. Nafees Ahmed. He has been now a scholar of refugee laws for the last 25 years. And I would say that here he has worked very honestly, and he is very good in literature, language, and law. Here I may mention one important thing about Dr. Muhammad Manzoor Alam, that we do have in the country food foundations. We are having road scholarships and all others, very big ones. But he did support with small amounts in few hundreds. Many scholars, many students in different universities, colleges, and Professor Dr. Nafis has been one of the beneficiaries of that small help from iOS. That's how I believe that Dr. Muhammad Manzoor Alam is living a good heritage and a good kind of practice to be emulated by many, that if you can help any of the students, any of the persons in the world, you must do it out of your a little bit effort which you can do. If I call that Professor Nafis has been very honest to his parents, to his institution, to his teachers, and he deserves a lot to be in the global agencies for managing affairs of these refugees, at least, and I wish him someday a very good position in UNHCR. In some important Asian regions. I think if people go very honestly, he is really a great expert of it, to my knowledge. Now I am going to another scholar. He is from National Law University, Delhi. One more big problem is human trafficking. And we can say human beings are still on sale. You civilized world, please appreciate this problem. Human being is still on sale. Unwillingly, earlier might be there was some consent also in primitive days or medieval periods and others, but today, under compulsion, coercion, human beings are like chattels, carried, sold, and then misused, exploited. Dr. Iqbal is an expert on it. I have requested him to tell us how can we make our international regimes effective. And I don't know if at all we have laws in our country also, but the title of the law is something and the content of the law is something. This is also happening sometimes. So that's how I leave the things the best to be dealt with by Dr. Iqbal Ahmed. Dr. Iqbal Ahmed, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Good morning, sir. Dr. Professor Wani, Professor Khan, and Professor Alam. Now, this is the first time I have been, asked by Professor Wani to contribute, and I don't know how relevant and how exact I would be, because for the reason that peace, etc., I'm not that familiar of the knowledge which Dr. Nafis pointed out. But as the theme somewhere is the relevance of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals for 2030. I have tried to put the issue of human trafficking with regard to the Sustainable Development Goals 2030. Unfortunately, I'm not being able to share the screen space over here, so I'll just try to share it with you otherwise. Now, in the beginning, see, my focus and attention is I'm not here to talk about good things,
Can you share screen?
I can share it. Okay. Thank you so much. Now, is it visible now? Is it visible to all?
Visible.
Visible. Okay, thank you so much. Now, as the theme of this particular session, I was asked to, and as I've shared with you with regard to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 2030, and I've been a little specific here with regard to this human trafficking. Now, how this is being addressed under this mechanisms. So what has been that I'll not go into this definition and what are the problems and what is human trafficking. All learned people around know much better than me as to the nuances of this human rights issues and problems. Now I'll just try to pinpoint certain 4 areas and how my focus is on the enforcement mechanism. Now again, in the beginning, we have been talking about good things, awareness raising, this thing is bad. But I personally feel that the crucial task of apprehension and prosecution of traffickers has not been accorded much priority in the national legal systems. We have a number of NGOs who are collecting information, organizing raids with the police department, but not much is coming out of it, and this problem continues as it is. Now, internationally speaking, as the Sustainable Development Goals, that's the new benchmarks of the United Nations for now. 5.2 has talked about gender equality, eliminating all forms of violence against women. We look at the 8.7, decent work and economic growth with regard to children. The same is in 8.8, where it talks about migrant workers. And importantly is the 16.2, where they have talked about having peace, justice, and strong institutions, whereby not only these institutions are required to end the abuse, but all forms of violence and the torture and eradicate trafficking. So generally speaking, as on date, the Sustainable Development Goals have identified this issue and they have bifurcated it in separate areas, looking into separate issues. Now, the focus, as I've been referring to you, is of the national governments, ideally speaking, should be to assist the victims. Unfortunately, with regard to the first issue, we continue to treat victims as undocumented criminals or as people who are not required. Important is for enforcement mechanisms that the investigation and prosecutional mechanisms as such in the national jurisdictions have to be strengthened together with the fact that the overall criminal justice response system of any jurisdiction has to be effectively strengthened if they wish to address this issue, keeping in mind the Sustainable Development Goals also. Now, coming to the legal responses of this trafficking issue, it has been varied. 1772, we look at the Somerset case, where a black slave escapes from the ship being taken to the United States at that point of time. Mind you, slavery at that point of time is not illegal in Britain. Now, when a writ of habeas corpus is filed and we read the judgment of Lord Mansfield at that point of time, where he says that the air of law is too pure that even a slave, although there is no legal protections which can be accorded, because at that point of time slavery as such is not illegal in Britain, it would be made punishable later on only. And that is, see, what I'm trying to argue over here is that a type of a thinking on the issue had been continuing for about more than 250 years. That somewhere or the other, Somerset case, for the first time, this issue of human beings being treated that way comes to the notice. Beginning with the 1904 agreement to the 1949 convention, we find a number of legal responses from time to time coming on the issue, coming on the problems. However, obviously, with the coming of the United Nations in 1945, the Universal Declaration, this whole momentum gets an impetus whereby various other international regional instruments continue to address this issue in varied forms. The Trafficking Protocols 2000 can be said to be the final word, in a sense that finally the international community comes together for achieving a common consensus on the points that no, this problem, this human misery, this human rights protection has to be accorded a priority in the international standards. As on date, about 178 countries have signed the agreement, the Palermo Protocols of 2000, and somewhere or the other, in the last 20 years, we have moved ahead, but still a lot remains. Now, obviously, what they have been trying to achieve, putting it at one place, their idea of 4 Ps: prevention, protection, prosecution, and a policy framework which has to be we need to have in various jurisdictions. Now, situation as such, apart from all these type of legal developments, and I may add here for your consideration that we already have a SARC Convention of 2002 on human trafficking. Not much has been achieved. This instrument for long has remained ineffective because of the lack of understanding between the SARC member states to arrive on a common platform. So if we look at a situation specifically, maybe in our South Asian region itself, say India, and mind you, India is one country which has a unique geographical location. No two other countries in the region can interact without touching India's land, sea, or airspace. Someone being trafficked, say from Nepal to Pakistan, necessarily crosses into India. From Bangladesh to Pakistan, Sri Lanka to Nepal, Nepal to Sri Lanka. So that's the unique position which India has. Now, idea and situation remains law enforcement. Whatever is the law has not been accorded much of the priority. The role of the non-governmental organizations, the human rights commissions, the other agencies have somewhere been on awareness building, rescue, try to rehabilitate them. The apprehension and prosecution of traffickers, the real people, the syndicates, the gangs which have been operating for long, has not been accorded much of the priority, not much of a mechanism we have, whereby not much of the cases, not much of the material where we find how you will finally apprehend and prosecute these traffickers. A major reason has been that a cross-border cooperation which is needed amongst the member states, unfortunately, has been lacking in South Asian region. It's not so. If we look at the ASEAN region, one of the regional mechanisms, they have already come up with a trafficking convention in 2017, and the 10 member states in the ASEAN region have moved quite ahead. They have been very effectively working on this problem in comparison, again, I'm saying, to the South Asian region, that is the SARC nations. Now, prosecution. States are obliged as under international law to prosecute when they sign and ratify that treaty. If you look at the Article 5 of the Trafficking Protocol 2000, specifically that a state has to have all sorts of legal enforcement mechanism, prosecutional systems in place so as to best address this issue. If we look at the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, the guidelines which had come in 2002, we look at Principle 2. Principle 2 also somewhere refers to this important area that states have to ensure effective responses to the prosecution aspect. Now, what can be done? What is the issue? What is to be achieved? Unfortunately, the situation remains that the comprehensive national legal framework is lacking. Countries have signed it. India has also signed it in 2011. We are still debating the trafficking bill. Not much has been achieved until and unless the crime is defined consistent with the international standards, together with the fact that it criminalizes all forms, whatever it is, and the definition which has been referred to in the international agreements, together with the fact that the penalties, that the prosecution shall commensurate this type of a serious crime. We do not leave it here. We need an intergovernmental council, various ministries of the government together, various departments of the government together, Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of Women and Child Development, Ministry of Labor, all ministries, please appreciate, coming together. So a comprehensive national legal framework is the first thing which is required. Important is how do we build up a strong, watertight case against the prosecutors? Any type of a case, the case may fall flat in the court of law. Idea somewhere is that an effective prosecution, judicial and police system, that is obvious for the reasons that it is the single victim, please appreciate, at times who may be the sole witness to the crime. Generally speaking, the police have a major issue with regard to treating as the person as an illegal person in the country. They may not be aware of the language itself which the person is speaking. And what is required is the specialized units. Serious and organized crime agency. For example, in England, now we have a specific agency which deals with all sorts of trafficking offenses, for example, in the jurisdiction of the United Kingdom. So idea somewhere is that we need to have a specialized type of a unit within the police force itself, which somewhere looks at all these issues of evidence collection and how to handle the case. Several districts in India, we have the anti-human trafficking units. They have been formed in several of the districts, about more than 200 districts in our country. But the problem remains that they are not well staffed and are not there at all places. Another important area is for the prosecutors, for the judicial officers to in itself understand the issue of trafficking. Unfortunately, we continue to lack on that behalf, because the judicial officers, the prosecutors, public prosecutors as such are still not trained in that area. An important thing and an obvious question is asked by everyone every time. How do you identify it? How can you say? How do you know? From where do you get this? Yes, it's a covert nature of the crime. It's not a crime which may happen openly or someone is going to share in itself. The problem is that a lot of background pressure is involved, where a person is on one hand traumatized, on the other hand he has been intimidated to a great extent, and quite possible that his immediate family members who may not be there may be under the strict control and of the traffickers. So with the inherent aspect that they do not trust the law enforcement agencies, unfortunately, identification remains the crucial area of work. Yes, one area is that state, etc., state can have more of its focus somewhere on certain visible and vulnerable sectors to identify. And a common and an easier way for the time being could be to give all protections, to give all assistance, to identify and extend that benefit, for example, to the child victim, that is a girl child. So in the beginning, I proposed that the girl child can be made the focus of approach, whereby we need not go into the strict legal technicalities of the law. At times, persons' presence may be totally illegal, but we are mandated under the international law and obligations to treat how to treat a child, especially a girl child. Importantly, bilateral and multilateral cooperation mechanisms. How do we get to it? Until and unless we share the information, we work together, our law enforcement agencies trust each other, continue to share the information, cooperate with each other, not much can be achieved. Obviously, every nation, may deny in the first place that this national belongs to them. Internationally speaking, the protocols have emphasized the need for bilateral agreements between the countries, multilateral cooperation mechanisms between the countries, identifying it as a core area of focus, whereby until and unless there is a great deal of cooperation between the member states, not much can be achieved. ASEAN Convention 2017 has taken a rapid stride into the field, whereby the cooperation amongst the member states is to be seen. Unfortunately, SAARC Convention 2002 remains ineffective. We have not been able to achieve much for certain reasons. A significant progress in all these times has been the memorandum of understanding signed between the governments of Bangladesh and India, constituting of the special task force, alternately meeting in Delhi and Dhaka, whereby the police force of both the countries have been engaging more, discussing more, at times even taking back. Bangladesh has been taking back the people who have been rescued in India. One area which sometimes comes up, although C is not in line with what I'm saying at the moment, is non-criminal resolutions. Question is that can non-criminal resolutions, or the whole idea that let's settle their wages, give them some damages, can there be an out-of-court settlement to this type of an issue? Because the practical problem remains that both investigation and trials in these type of matters, please appreciate, are too time consuming and resource incentive, with no conviction of a guarantee of a conviction in the later stage, and together with the fact that the victim as such may at a later stage turn hostile. Although say this is not in line with the Palermo protocols, because legal enforcement mechanisms, Palermo protocols have been emphasizing time and again for the countries to come up with a specific legal mechanisms. Lack of trafficking data. How do we get to know? We talk about it. Big cities, labor, sex trafficking, other type of forms of exploitation. We do not have much of a data. We continue to rely upon certain non-governmental organizations, whereby whatever data they tend to supply, we believe it, and somewhere or the other continue on it. Now, just coming to the last area, as my time is running out, it's undocumented. Until and unless we look at the role of the donor agencies, very importantly to emphasize on the criminal justice systems, making them more efficient, we have not been able to get to the financial networks who are functioning, how they have been sending this money across from one country to another. Public health area, we have not been able to document until and unless this policy, planning, program, prosecution, whatever we talk about. On one hand, my submission is that certain areas as on date continue to remain undocumented. We have not been able to achieve much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Iqbal Ahmed, for giving a very comprehensive view on trafficking and also underlining the responsibilities and also approaches and attitudes of the nation states. I believe now nation states should take more care of the people suffering from human trafficking. I may say that now more than religious places, there is need for uh, looking to centers for establishing the caretaking centers for these people who are suffering under this human trafficking. Yes, definitely place of worship, all right, they may be maintained, but at the same time, this is a big problem and God cannot be happy with this situation. Now I am coming to another very important but very specialized area that human beings can make a difference, administrators can make a difference. And so we had one of the presidents of United States of America in the form of Ronald Reagan. We were then in our universities and colleges. I think United States has an important role to play. They must play a very important role. They have the, this, let us say, potential to advance good things, and their mind has to be at right place. They must do that. We have from University School of Law and Legal Studies, Dr. Vanna Singh, who is in specialized in very important areas, emerging areas like intellectual property rights, and also in alternative dispute resolution. That's how she is going to speak on Reaganomics and the promotion of peace. I was thinking of promoting a science of Vanemomics, but now she is coming with the Reaganomics, and then let me see. She let us see, and she has some very important points to make, which are very important, and with the change in U.S. With Biden taking over, and how Reagan was thinking about peace and how he had planned it. So let me now invite Professor Dr. Vanna Singh to kindly make your presentation. I can here have some command that about time
Yes, sir.
because of my familiarity. So please, okay, Dr. Vandana.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Good morning, all the dignitaries, resource person, and participants, and the organizing committee of Indian Institute of Objective Studies. It's my privilege to share my opinion and share my paper on Reaganomics and promotion of peace. As we are aware that pandemics have happened before also, but never were we as connected as we are today. Good, bad, but not indifferent. Our social media structure should be used not only for sharing what we are doing at home, but as a potent vehicle to drive through world peace. Certainly, I can say that this conference is an initiative in that direction, and we have seen from last 2 days that all the minute detail of minute detail to maintain global peace and to develop global peace have been discussed from last 2 days. In the same direction, my paper, that is Reaganomics and Promotion of Peace, is a small idea that how we can relate the economic also to the global peace and world peace. As we are aware that ultimately the economic and the financial condition is having major role in maintaining peace throughout the world. We all are aware, but before that, I would like to convey my special regard to my mentor, my guru, Professor M. F. Afzal Wani, who has encouraged me all the way, and because of whom I'm here, and whatever I am today, I'm just because of Professor Wani. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. So when we talk about world peace is the idea of a world with no violence, a world with a motivation for people and nation to willingly cooperate, either voluntarily or by virtue of a system of governance. We all are aware, and we have discussed in previous paper also, that since 1945 the United Nations and its specialized agencies, several international associations and institutions, international peace movement, global and national level human rights movement, and in fact all members of the international community have been consistently and strongly advocating the need for the preservation and promotion of peace against war. But the international community fully realized the supreme importance of the virtue of peace against war after having suffered the most unfortunate and highly destructive two world wars in the first half of the 20th century. The blood shred of humanity that lay in several hundred battlegrounds, particularly on the soil of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, cried for peace on the earth. Conceptions of peace and the approaches to secure world peace have changed from time to time, with new political leaders, government policies and thinkers coming to light every now and then. So it would be delusional to believe that there exists an ideal format for obtaining peace in the world, because every approach has its own pros and cons. Working towards a more stable and peaceful world is limited by problem within key three areas of human concern: the need for an equitable economic system, the urgent need to respond to climate breakdown, and an approach to international security that avoid the common military approach of responding to challenges with early use of force. We have discussed all the SDG goal and several international treaties and convention to achieve the global peace. We will understand this from one such perspective when it comes to first point, that is economic area, that is the Reaganomics perspective. But before that, I would like to give little bit detail about the background of this particular paper, which is related to Keynesian approach versus Reaganomic approach. Sir has already shared the idea of President Ronald Reagan, that how he started with the Reaganomics, and that was against the principle of Keynesian approach. A little bit background I would like to share, that history is never simple or clear cut, but when it comes to 20th century American history, a major historical pace turn occurred right around 1980. It marked not just a break between liberalism and conservatism, but also a break between two very important way of organizing the world economy. Before 1980, we all are aware the Americans run more or less according to ideals of Keynesian economic, but after 1980, the economy run according to ideas of monetarism or Reaganism. What was the Keynesian economy? The key highlight when we have to see was born when the British economist John Maynard Keynes was living through the Great Depression of 1930. He witnessed millions and millions of people unemployed and saw huge portion of the productive apparatus of the society sitting idle and not being used. So he believed something to be extremely fundamentally wrong, and he basically concluded that if a capitalist system is left to its own devices, it would open to door for instability and periodic downturn. Downtime and depression, and would further involve unnecessary suffering, unnecessary loss of product, huge unemployment, and various related social problems. So he stressed upon the fact that it is better for the government to come in and interfere in the economy in a variety of ways to reap the benefits of capitalism without actually paying the horrific cost which the Great depression had made so clear by then. After that, when we talk about the Reaganomic era or Reaganomics, the basic idea was that capitalism is one articulated system that most of the time remains in very good shape, but in case the same faces any problem, then those problems are, number one, temporary, and number two, the system is such that it self-correct and revive itself. So for Reagan, the best cure is to let the system fix itself instead of doing anything which was the approach of Keynesian economics. The Reaganomics believe that the best cure is to let the system fix itself. Ever since then, there has been a debate between the two sides, that is those who want the government to remain out of the picture and let the system function on its own, versus those who say that this scenario would be too dangerous and inefficient. The latter side with the view that the government has to play a major role, or else not only will have unnecessary suffering, but also in the end, the mass of people won't tolerate the continuation of a capitalist system that produces instability and inefficiency. So in Keynesian economy, we can say that there was active government involvement at every step of the economy, and this entire scenario represented a clear picture of the major role of government intervention in boosting the economy of the US at that time. In fact, there came a time when the people started viewing the private sector as a problem and the government intervention as the solution. But the Reaganomics approach opened doors for the other perspective, that is the scope of economic advancement, by limiting the role of government in the sphere of economy. If with these two backgrounds, if we want to relate now we are aware that we are towards the neoliberalism. We are not having either of the complete economy, but how one thing or the economic structure can be related to peace. We can say that President Reagan took over the presidential office in 1980 at a time when the United States was hit with evil of stagnant economy and high inflation, a situation which later widely came to be known as stagflation. Reagan was an anti-Keynesian, and he tried to shift the center of the political spectrum sharply to the right. He set about undoing a half century of legislation which had built up the public sector while opening up America to the expansion led by private sector. His approach conveyed his idea that the government itself is the one which is majorly the cause of economic problem in the country, like high inflation and slow economic growth. So for him, the solution lay in retracting the government intervention back to the position where it once was, that is prior to the Keynesian economy, thereby limiting government intervention in the economy. The important phrase which was famous during his time, that is peace for strength, holds great relevance in the era of Reaganomics revolution. This phrase can be traced back to the Roman Emperor Hadrian, but the concept is as old as recorded history. Even in the Indian epic Ramayana, which is considered to be around 7,000 years old, even Lord Rama is quoted as saying, "Bhai bin hoye na preet," meaning thereby that once the prayer for peace fails, one may need to instill fear to bring peace. The phrase which Reagan emphasized upon at the time, this election changing against Jimmy Carter, also happened to be peace through strength. He accused the incumbent of weak, facilitating leadership that invited enemies to attack the United States and its allies. This phrase was later on considered to be the main style in the foreign policy as a president. In 1986, he again explained that we know that peace is the condition under which mankind was meant to flourish. Yet, peace does not exist of its own. It depends on us, on our courage to build it and guard it and pass it on the future generation. President Ronald Reagan, he pushed for the Air Force means technology and so many things. I'm not going into detail of those things due to constraint of time. Even means we are aware that if we have to relate the relevance of Reaganomics in today's world for securing global peace, we know that till today several hindrances have been present in the way of securing a stable, healthy, and enduring peace. Fortunately, the final end of the Cold War came in the last decade of the 20th century, and the world found herself living in an environment characterized by a new faith and commitment to peace, peaceful coexistence, peaceful conflict resolution, liberalization, cooperation for development, and attempt at sustainable development. Post Cold War, the people began focusing their attention on the need for protection of human right of all, and for the protection of environment and securing of a real and meaningful international integration. However, several negative factors like ethnic conflict, ethnic violence, ethnic terrorism, and its several dimension, neo-colonialism and like, kept on acting as a big hindrances. The need to secure peace by controlling these evil continue to be a primary aim of international community. Crises have been repeatedly coming, and these are bound to keep coming. This makes it very urgent for the humankind to prepare and act for managing crisis through collective effort and by use of several devices. We know that through international peacekeeping under the aegis of United Nations, through the development and use of international law, creation of more international and regional institutions committed to promote peace, promotion of friendly cooperation for development among the member countries, popularization of peaceful means of conflict resolution, institutionalization of relation among nations, integration of international community through strengthening of human consciousness in favor of peace against war, and by enhancing the ability for crisis management, the humankind has been trying to secure peace against war. We have learned our lesson that war might pay off in the short run, but for the maintenance of global peace in the long run, cooperation and friendly relation and stable economy amongst the countries is considered to be very important thing. Critics we can say at the end that oppose the efficacy of war in securing peace by stating that a belief in the efficacy of military power almost inevitably breeds the temptation to put that to work. To put it more precisely, peace through strength easily enough has the potential to become peace through war. To put it more clearly, it can be said that it is evident that Reagan approach to bring peace was merely a way of securing territorial peace, that is to protect America against the world, especially against the Soviet Union. But today, post the America victory against the forces during that time, the pressure which once shadowed upon US has now lifted. Today, what is more important is that all nations work towards building a greater and stronger mechanism at securing world peace rather than territorial peace. We all have in this conference also we are talking about global peace and not the territorial peace. The goal is to prevent war and bring peace not by threat of war or deterrence, but by building up of a mutual understanding between the nation across the world with respect to the fact that the answer does not lie in war but in a collective effort to prevent it. What we need to follow is an inverted move away from strength for peace and towards peace for strength. No doubt the absence of war is the first condition for peace, yet peace is not merely an absence of war. It is reality, a condition characterized by peaceful, cooperative, harmonious conduct of international relations with a view to secure all-round sustainable development of the people of the world. What should be expected in that new social movement will develop that are essentially anti-economic slowdown in nature and draw their support from people of the margin in different contexts and circumstances. They may have their roots in political ideologies, religious belief, nationalist, nationalist or cultural identities, or a complex combination of several of these. They may be focused on individuals or group, but the most common feature in an opposition is against the center of power. What we need is an equal economic power so that peace can be maintained. Reaganomic approach did succeed in keeping the Cold War cold, but it kept the entire world preoccupied during 1945 to 1990, and indirectly secured this objective in a negative way by developing a balance of terror in international relations. While it was successful in preventing a global war, it failed to prevent local wars, and in fact gave rise to several tensions, stresses, strains, and crises in international relations. For bringing global peace, the focus should shift from the macro data and move to the idea of peeping into the micro details of the suffering in the lives of the people. World peace can never be obtained just by signing and exchanging document or treaty. Rather, it is necessary to delve deep into the realm of darkness, to uphold the flickering light of justice, to support the most wretched souls. This is what a real effort towards securing and establishing peace would require, the one which propagates happiness and diminishes anxiety of uncertainty. With this, I would like to conclude by saying that the cause of peace knows no party. The cause of peace transcends beyond personal ambition. The cause of peace demands appeal for unity and not divisiveness. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you so much for keeping time and very great ideas. I believe there is a big message that peace should not be aspired because of threat of war. Peace should be a natural process. We should associate world communities, individuals in the process of economic development. And nations should not take pride in occupying other communities, lands, their economies, other things. Rather, they should associate all the people with the economic process and make it wide enough for accommodating everybody, and we'll definitely have peace. I think the cake is so wide. Narrowness should go, inaneness should go, and the economic process can be the best if it is, with with welfare models. It has to be taken, and then accommodative approach in economics that has to be taken, and that can result into better use of world resources. Otherwise, when some nation wants to take strides, they use the resources available on the planet in a crony way, that's how Professor Vanna, I believe she has a message that we should use the world resources for economic development with inclusions of all who are living on this planet Earth as a process, as an economic process, rather than merely thinking of peace as a contra to the threat of war. No. We are grateful to you, and we hope you will give a very good paper for the publication as well. Now, I would say that in the country, definitely we have found very good institutions of legal studies have come up. But I think Delhi University still stands, at the top. Whatever might be the national law universities and others. And from Delhi University, we are having a good scholar. He is Dr. Parikshit Sirohi. He is presently very active in delivering lectures, and people are taking the advantage of this pandemic and are putting him very much alert in sharing his thoughts with people, I believe, across states. And he is presently talking on very important issues. And that's how I requested him that to be with us also on the day, And he is, a kind heart also, and also very handsome, if I say. And he got married during the pandemic year, and we could not enjoy the feast, so that's due to us. But at the same time, I'm asking him to speak about that how, the first goal is no poverty. UN talks of no poverty, but how? How can we, go without poverty in the world? So I straightway request Dr. Parikshit Sirohi from Delhi University Faculty of Law, Campus Law Center, to please give your ideas and thoughts on this sustainable development goal, and maybe related also, the days yours, choices yours, on end of poverty. Uh, Professor Dr. Parikshit Sirohi.
Thank you very much, sir, for the kind words. I've always enjoyed a lot of affection whenever it is Professor Vani or Professor Vandana Singh or Dr. Zubair or anybody else from IP University. Professor Vani was, of course, my teacher, as was Dr. Vandana Singh. So, first of all, I must congratulate the Institute of Objective Studies for organizing this wonderful program today and yesterday. On the theme identification of principal foundations of global peace. I have personally benefited a lot from hearing the views of such erudite scholars like Professor Vani, Professor Khan, Professor Manoj Sinha, Professor Aftab Alam, Dr. Anna, Professor Anuj, who was again my teacher, Professor Nafis today, Vandana Singh ma'am, I think excellent discourse on Reagan's economic policies, and so many others. Also very, very nice presentations from the scholar from Malaysia. I thank my professor for inviting me to share my thoughts with you on the topic prospective relevance of UN SDGs, goal number 1, end poverty in all forms for attainment of global peace. Friends, as we all know, there are a total of 17 sustainable development goals. Earlier, they were called Millennium Development Goals. Now they have been changed to Sustainable Development so that they can lead to more sustainable overall development. I will try to remain conscious of the time that has been given to me and speak to you a little bit about poverty. I personally feel that all these goals are linked to each other. I did my PhD thesis on right to food security. So poverty is linked to hunger, hunger is linked to lack of employment, which is linked to lack of education and so on and so forth. According to me, there is a great deal of linkage, and so when it was talked about reducing hunger by half, the target was in 1995, the World Food Summit, Rome Declaration 1994 actually. They said that we want to reduce by half the number of the world's hungry people by 2015. What happened by 2015? Except for few countries like Uganda, etc., who, because of the base which was very large, were able to reduce by half, the actual number of hungry people in the world actually went up. Instead of reducing by half, it actually increased. So, and I have talked about these things very recently in an international conference in Barcelona, Spain. Of course, the great advantage that the pandemic gives you is that, there is no need for travel and you can present your views and you can imbibe the views of so many scholars all over the world. Friends, I am going to take an interlinked approach, a slightly different approach. And I am going to make out a case that education is the root of all problems. Professor Vani was telling us yesterday that if a person is not educated, it is much more easy to radicalize him or her, and which is absolutely correct. The threat to global peace comes from hunger. The threat to global peace comes from the fact that even after so many years, whatever 9/11, whatever we are seeing every day, 1,000 cuts to bleed India, 1,000,000 cuts, etc., Syria, Lebanon, there is no universally accepted definition of terrorism all over the world. So that is one thought I'm going to leave you with. And now I am going to start with my presentation, which is basically talking about the fact that out of the 17 SDGs, the progress towards the other 16, including goal number 1, poverty, can be measured through the development that we make in terms of one SDG. And that one SDG, to my mind, is delivering quality education. So the challenges of meeting educational needs continue to remain a central concern in all social settings. Not the least when it comes to global fora, because there is a clear link, direct link between the level of education and the abstract level. I'm not saying everybody should study up to PhD, no, but everybody should have basic level of education. And I am trying to make out a case for that through the course of my paper. The challenge of integrating various social, ethnic, economic, political realities in the educational framework while still marching towards economic development is formidable. And in recent years, we have tried to bring about changes in pedagogy to make classes more interesting, to make education more interesting. Pandemic has thrown up challenges, and it has also given opportunities. So I will be talking about those new technologies and new things which have happened in the pandemic in the later part. So in recent years, one major problem which we have found is ethnic strife. Sudan was one country until very recently, as was Czechoslovakia, as was Yugoslavia. Now, more and more divisive societies, we see the same in India. So the divide on economic lines, the divide on religious lines, the divide on caste lines, this is creating more of a problem for poverty. Please understand, for a poor man, I have personally seen it takes 100 rupees for him or her to convert his religion, and you have a real big communal riot happening. And who suffers? It is the poorest of the poor who suffer. So there has to be a linkage between the level of 100 rupees and the fellow is willing to convert his religion. And 100 rupees is what? Cost of maybe 5 cigarettes for those of us who smoke. And 1/3 of the cost of a pizza for those of us who like to eat pizza. That is what it takes for a poor person to change his religion. Because so these are certain problems which can be addressed through education. Ultimately, if you have education, everybody will realize that all religions basically teach the same thing. So there is no incentive really to change a religion. The other issue is gender parity. Classrooms have to become more and more inclusive of women. The reduction of conspicuous consumption will also end poverty, will foster more industry, more infrastructure. So these kind of things, the importance of environmental issues, because environment is the only environment that we have. This is again another SDG linked to poverty. Environmental degradation is leading to loss in people's income. So once this environment is destroyed, the livelihood of people will also be destroyed. Nobody will have another chance to reclaim it. The curricula has to be integrated and has to assimilate concerns prevalent amongst various sections of society. And so clean drinking water, decent sanitation, you have to provide all these in schools. These are also your SDGs. And you have to ensure good mental health. Mental health is one of the very important factors which we don't talk about. Good mental health, good physical health, and this will lead to improvement in eradication of poverty. So we till now we have been following Fome Zero in Brazil, which means zero hunger. We have been following Garibi Hatao in India. These are all operating in silos. We need to get out of the silo mentality. We need to give quality education. We need to have an all-inclusive kind of an education structure. That is the case I'm trying to make out. Quality education, in my view, should be the birthright of any school and college going student across the world, irrespective of the country in which he or she is born. The world is today a global village thanks to improved means of transport, communication, internet. We have been joined by scholars yesterday from Australia, from Sydney, from Malaysia, and all of that is because of these modern means. So modern day students understand the need for ensuring peace and justice. We have to drill it even more into their heads. And the need for collaborations, the need for partnerships. We have to tell them about things like climate change, climate degradation, which is again part of an SDG. The world is today consuming more and more energy. I was reading day before yesterday, 195 gigawatts power consumed in India. That is the highest ever that we reached 2 days back. So the lifestyle is such that you need more and more power. So the importance of sustainable energy, clean energy, green energy. So these things have to be brought into classrooms. Quality education, once it is made available, it would make it a lot easier for youth to obtain employment avenues. Once that is done, you cannot lead them astray. Once that is done, it will automatically lift them and their families outside poverty. So the importance of educating a person has a direct correlation lifestyle and the monetary aspects. And this is something which should be reflected in classrooms. Again, they say that you educate a woman, you educate the entire family. So that is why I said gender parities. Public bodies and private entities have to work in unison, and then only you will lead to this universal attainment of this universal goal of development. You have to have multidisciplinary approach and integrated studies. So you cannot eradicate poverty as a standalone goal. You have to follow multi-pronged approach. And again, for this, I am suggesting education. Please understand that the right to education was incorporated at the global level as far back as 1948 when it was included in the UDHR. Since then, we have been reinforcing the faith of people towards attaining education. Now, in education, it is not just only education. In India, we give more midday meals. In Brazil, we give them PNAE. So the students, the young ones, they are getting their. In India, we have Anganwadis, Balwadis, from 0 to 6, lactating mothers. Their healthcare needs are taken care of. Obviously, they will be lifted out of poverty. So it is all inclusive again. So this is under the aegis of the United Nations in aspiration of achieving the Agenda 2030 of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now you have to set up in such a way that the dreams of every economic group, every ethnic group, and every minority group has to be included. So today now you are having this new vaccine for COVID. How safe is it? You have to educate the people. They're not going to end up taking it. There was so much of hesitancy in taking a simple polio vaccine. This is far more complex. Ye kaise hoga? This will only be possible if you are doing education. Otherwise, some people will continue to be afflicted by this virus. And obviously they will become poor because this virus creates a lot of damage which is lasting. It creates damages to your eyes, it creates damages to your cardiac system. It creates so many things which are coming out in research. Your lungs are never going to recover and various other things are there. So you have to imbibe in education civic conscience, which is there. Civic conscience has to be imbibed. Academicians have historically laid a lot of emphasis on individual process, on individual growth, not on growth of society as a whole. This probably needs to change. I'm going to suggest that sustainability in the education sector, also the higher education sector, should incorporate positive steps for the development of so that people are educated and they are informed about the need to go and give back to society. This will help in making achievements in other domains like poverty, hunger, unemployment, health, well-being and justice. Doctors don't want to do rural postings. They don't want to do rural postings because there is no infrastructure. All this can be corrected with education. And all of this, once done, will be able to lead to better procedural development, better ways of bringing people out of poverty. Again, the role of COVID-19, I want to specifically focus and why this has changed the way. So, nowadays you are having webinars, conferences, online teaching, Cisco, WebEx, Google Meet, Zoom. These have become buzzwords. So while it has created a very major challenge, so much of humanity is virtually locked up into their houses. The United States has lost many more people than it did during the Second World War, as a result of COVID-19, more than 4 lakh people. And thanks to the policies of their erstwhile president, who did not think it was serious enough. But it has also given us so many things. It has said that the traditional needs, the traditional methods of imparting education may not remain so relevant today. Today the buzzword is blended learning. Maybe if we work in that direction, we can actually use it to our advantage. because we have so many people in India possessing mobile phones. And if we were able to scale up the internet bandwidth, which may or may not happen very fast, but at least it has shown the way that you can do this in a much more effective manner. You can use Doordarshan, Gyan Darshan, etc. And these are all back to the agenda. So I will take you to the Bond Declaration of 2009, which deals with the educational aspect of sustainable development and highlights the significance of educating people, while also speaking about how education empowers people in their personal and professional development and gives them more avenues for growth. And thus they are lifted out of poverty and hunger. It lays down the importance of stress and competencies, that the skills which people should possess. There are MDGs, Millennium Development Goals, and there is Education for All agenda. These are all major breakthroughs in achieving the progress towards equality all over the world. Some such sustainable practices and curricula have been successfully implemented in the poverty-prone areas of the world, like the Sahelian countries, the South Asian countries, Asia Pacific, other parts of Africa. The ongoing pandemic has necessitated the need for global connectivity, and governments all across the world realize that there is a need to make internet more accessible to more number of individuals in developed countries. And if you are able to harness the internet, you can maybe have better cascading of information to a larger population. One more other improvement I would suggest, in which we are seeing actually in India also, but maybe it is not happening fast enough, is that the education system has to become more engaging. It has to become more inquisitive. It has to have more involvement of research, especially in higher education. This will lead to adequate analysis of the subject matter. There will be proper coherence between theory and practice. And research would begin in the initial phases of higher education programs and can be harnessed in a more effective manner once the student is moving to PG level. So then you can delve deeper into the various subject roots, the various topics that you are studying. This research-based approach is something which will make students more engaged, more interested. And in the view of me, the author of this paper, higher education has to stop functioning in the silo mentality. You have to have various departments, you have to have various interdisciplinary approach, you have to have proper articulation of various skills, etc. And this will lead to integrated learning, which will lead to proper workplace learning. And again, people can have more and more well-informed citizenry, which will have good impact on poverty alleviation. Now, the quality of the education system can be assessed through various progressive indicators for assessment. And I have already spoken to you about one of the things being the gender parity, because that can be one essential benchmark, because engaged learning across genders in the classroom can certainly minimize disparities in society, inequalities in society, which are faced by female students and females in today's environment. So this leads to decent work and opportunities, etc., which are there. So if you have a good knowledge base, you can develop a good knowledge economy, and this knowledge economy will not be so much susceptible to the vagaries of other factors of production, and can be more sustainable. Government of India has recently come up with this call for Atmanirbhar Bharat, or self-reliant India, as a tool to promote innovation. If this measure is successful, it will certainly pave the way for improved economic, social, cultural development of the nation as a whole. And it will lead to a lot of integrated learning mechanisms, in my view. And we will also come up with more involvement of students. Towards the end, I would like to say that cooperative learning through groups, learning through networking, learning through partnerships, learning through collaborations, learning through sharing are important aspects which will help us to achieve the goals of Agenda 2030. And these transformational aspects of learning will make it easier to grant education to a success, to a segment of people who are so far outside the purview of education. The other major thing which students need to understand, which we as citizens need to understand, that in order to quell poverty, we have to avoid conspicuous consumption. The consumption which is basically wastage, emphasis on learning, recycling, emphasis on living in sync with environment, not to use air conditioning whenever it is avoidable. Simple things like these will help to have better, because this environment is posing a very serious crisis. You had the previous American president take his country out of the Paris Agreement, which demonstrates a complete lack of awareness, because you have global warming, melting of glaciers, failure of rain-fed agriculture, which is leading to people falling into poverty. And so these kinds of unsustainable behaviors lead to poverty. And we as teachers, we as resource persons should educate future generations about waste management, the objectives of sustainable development through equitable, inclusive, qualitative measures for promoting lifelong learning, because education works as a catalyst for bringing about changes in the individual as well as society. And therefore, education can bring about sustainable development by preserving and conserving ecology and environment. If we are doing this, we will also be able to build on strong international institutions. If we are educating people, if people are no longer poor, then we will understand that international institutions which will promote peace, justice, which is again a sustainable development goal, strengthening, it is goal number 16, I believe. So peace, justice, and strong institutions. So the failure of the League of Nations led to the Second World War. What was the main reason? The main reason was people did not understand the need to have these institutions and the need to strengthen them. Why did they not understand? Because of endemic poverty in the colonial world. They said that, okay, we don't need to understand what League of Nations is. We have been asked to fight on behalf of Denmark or Japan or Germany or Poland or Britain. We will fight. We have nothing at stake. No, you have the whole world at stake. So international institutions are there, the International Criminal Court, ICJ, UNESCO, UNICEF, UNDP, UNEP, so many others. They have done commendable work in trying to lift the world out of poverty, promote peace, and have been instrumental in promoting the goals of justice and sending the method of strengthened institutions. Lastly, I will just take 2 to 3 minutes to conclude. Human development is akin to growth, and progress of a country and education is one of the most appreciable ways in which higher development rates can be ensured. Once you have higher development rates, there will be reduction in the gaps between the learned and the not so learned. We will be able to bridge these, and we will be able to take the country forward. We will be able to lift the country out of poverty, and we will be able to achieve the goals of sustainable development in the line with Agenda 2030 as prescribed by the United Nations. Once again, thank you very much, sir. And I've tried to keep it within the time limit, maybe 2 to 3 minutes more. Thank you, sir. Sir, Vani sir, you are on mute, I think. Yes, now you're not.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. It was very great. And I am reminded of a great saint, scholar of the world and subcontinent, Sheikhul Alam. He then said 700 years before that there is all stormy in the world. Is there anybody who would light the lamp of knowledge and understanding so that the world comes to understand the things, and that's how you can fight poverty. There is no need to build now Great Wall of China again to be in peace. There is need to open and dismantle all these barriers, come out more knowledgeable with more understanding, more skill, more accommodation, and more with the spirit of contributing to the betterment of others rather than being crony for your own self-aggrandizement, as we find in certain situations. So God bless you, Dr. Parikshat Sirohi. I am finding a great future jurist in you. You keep on doing things, and that will be good. And I know you are the son of a very great mother also. She is also with all those intellectual, moorings. So God bless you. Now I am taking up one of the very brilliant emerging scholars, Dr. Zubair Ahmed Khan. Dr. Zubair is a very good scholar of environmental studies, and then he has the distinction of being a legal aid activist, and then he is, though he is all with all qualities of being a very vibrant, scholar, but his heart is in society. He is conducting many these programs for society, and he was a leader when 2 years back Delhi was caught by cold and severe cold was there, and then he was collecting cloths from different homes and distributing them along with Dr. Manna Singh to the poor people so that they could save their lives from severe cold. So he is in anything. He understands the best of the law. And today, I think he is the best person who understands biopiracy the best. But what I am trying to look to is protection of biodiversity. And so that, humanity has that idea as well, because that's very important for anybody to live in peace. The species under threat, no, there are species under threat. There are human groups under threat. There are communities under threat. There are different groups under threat. So, and also the various plant varieties are under threat. And I can say various species, animal species are under threat. And he is a very great scholar, good scholar. So Dr. Zubair, please come and give your presentation. But in your case also, I would like to have a little bit of the command. We have the guest from Sri Lanka. He is also waiting. So I wish that we, reasonably finish and we are going to publish it so that will be communicated. So Dr. Zubair.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Very good afternoon to all the respected sir. I am very honored to present my paper today. I'm thankful to our Professor M. Afzal Wani. I'm thankful to Professor Z.M. Khan, Professor Manzoor Alam, Dr. Vanna Singh, Professor, my learned friend, Dr. Nafis Ahmed, and my doctor friend, Prakshit Sohi. Yesterday and today we discussed about many contemporary issues about global peace, and I have heard the very important message which has been spread by Professor M. Afzal Wani yesterday and even today, which goes to the main direction, that is about the idea of Vasudhaiv Kutum also, which basically says that it is a collective endeavor for the collective benefit also. Now, in that context, basically, we have understood altogether that how significant this global peace is important altogether. Now, in the context of my topic altogether, you see, there is a particular area which I'm trying to cover today also in a very short span of time also. You see, the SDG, this Sustainable Development Goals, are basically the drivers of innovations, and their multi-governmental approach coupled with the public and private partnership have created a lot of scope altogether in every developing country also. And especially in those countries where there's a need to have an inclusive growth altogether. So it has become very important for all of us to recognize the main agenda, that is the 2030 agenda of sustainable development, which has become a very important blueprint for the resilient and the very green recovery towards the society altogether. Now, in that context, this protection of biodiversity on the protection of or other bioresources has become very much important. And that is why the goal number 15 of Sustainable Development Goal is very important, which says to protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of ecosystem and sustainable managing forest also. Now, you see, we have different international legal instruments dealing with these issues. One of the leading institution is that is International Treaty for Plants, Food and Genetic Resources. We have also the international legal instrument in the form of Convention of Biological Diversity also. Both legal diversity, as I said earlier, also have created thousands of literature as to how to work upon the sustainable use of biodiversity and how to develop a mechanism in the developing countries also, or all those countries which are biologically enriched countries, to have a conservation and preservation of the biological resources. Now, this was the main idea why these two institutions plays a very important role also. But at the same time, when you're talking about this particular goal, we have come to know, we know that the contribution of biodiversity is very much important, is very much essential to the sustainable development also. And that is why in that direction, basically, I'm trying to connect it, that how these two issues are intertwined to each other altogether. And you say, when you're trying to analyze these two perspectives, we have two important principles also. One, the economic globalization also, which has favored the economies of the scales or traditional protection also. We came to know from many Western countries that they are very strong economic, macroeconomic benefits, but at the same time, it has certain side effects also, possibly in the form of standardization also, where we know that in many countries that there are many agricultural societies who are more relying upon the monoculture crops also, and possibly in the form of urbanization also, which may lead the economies to develop industrial and service-based sectors also. At the same time, we have understood either we talks about standardization or either we talks about urbanization. Both gradually leads to human encroachment also. So this has become a major interesting issue altogether. There is another major of concern, area of concern, which have come across while reading these literatures and while reading the impact of these, can say, the policy altogether. That is in the form of uniformization of agriculture techniques also. Now, we have seen that, you see, with the passage of time, when you see the green revolution, which has come into picture also, there are many developing countries who started using pesticides and high yield crops also. And at the same time, these has led to the degradation of water, air, and other factors also. And at the same time, we have also come to know that these things have actually loses the nutrients of the biodiversity which produces also. So we have understood that these phenomena must have been born from the economic growth and development studies also. But we also must not forget the main important point. That is, biodiversity has become a direct object of consumption also. And that actually leads us to contemplate that is it a time to shift the opinion of Western epistemology altogether, which keeps on affecting the customary rights, which keep on affecting the indigenous rights of the forest dwellers or these biological resources also. Is it a time has come to recognize the indigenous epistemology altogether? So that is the main area altogether, where we found out that these are the tools through which economic growth has expanded, has actually resulted into some kind of degradation also. So where is this idea of economic inclusion talks about? When you see the number of issues altogether, my dear friend Parikshit has discussed about a very important point about poverty also. Many developing countries and developed countries have discussed about poverty reduction strategies also. And in this pandemic phase, and I'm sure in the post-pandemic phase, maybe World Bank and many other leading institutions may come up with certain important issues, maybe in the form of situational poverty also. There was a time where we used to discuss about relative poverty and absolute poverty also. But when you're talking about situational poverty, when you're talking about the concept of poverty trap, it is very much important to understand the significance of social protection floor also. Professor Vani have discussed at many forums, have discussed about just like how the environment impact assessment has become very much important in many cases, in many cases of global governance. Social impact assessment is also very much important. Now, that actually reminds us altogether that you see there's a major challenge which we are facing even today, maybe in the form of environmental crimes also. The other day, I was reading and I was discussing one of the leading conference also about green criminology also. That how green criminology has affected not only the human security, but the social security also. And that leads to contemplation of a very important topic about green victimization also. Now, this green victimization is somehow related with environmental crime also, maybe in the form of wildlife trafficking, maybe in the form of illicit fishing also, or maybe in the form of unauthorized use of bioresources, which maybe, or which we prefer to call it as a biopiracy also. So all those types of environmental crimes actually leads to some kind of a corruption altogether. And yes, it has become a major challenge to biodiversity justice. It has become a major challenge to the global governance, which is working towards biodiversity conservation also. And at the same time, these are not the reasons for the biodiversity loss. My dear friends, we must understand that there are different reasons of inequality, income inequality, which also leads to biodiversity loss also. And yes, these factors also affect the health of the ecosystem also. So when you're talking about the larger income equality within the countries, which is very important also, it has a direct connection with the biodiversity loss altogether. And in those cases, it is very difficult to identify the degree or the quantum of casualty altogether. So there are many social political aspects which might be very much relevant in India, which my previous speakers have discussed about. Also, Professor Nafis has discussed about how gender and ethnicity seems to be very important to understand the indigenous epistemology also. Maybe in the context of refugee law also, but yes, in the environmental law perspective, from the biodiversity perspective, it is very much important also. And that is why the issue of benefit sharing has been developed as a literature by Nagoya Protocol also. Now, these Convention of Biological Diversity and the other protocols may play a very important role in creating the documents altogether. But at the same time, while in the case of implementation, what we saw a social and ecological disintegration also. Now, this social and this ecological disintegrations, there have been many attempts has been made by the government by the authorities at the Western countries and in the developing countries also. And where we found out, that maybe in the form of European Union, which plays a very important role to revise the foreign policy which we have also. And they have understood that, you see, climate change is a major issue altogether, which may lead to the biodiversity loss also. I'm sure in this pandemic phase, by climate change, we have seen thousands of literature developing about climate change altogether. But at the same time, this is also something very much important, that how these degradation and loss of biodiversity may play a very important role. So coming to the main issue, when you're talking about global peace perspective also, it is very much important that we must discuss about that how the strategic plan which has been drafted by the International Treaty of Plants and Genetic Resources and CBD plays a very important role. They created global platform and they're working upon international cooperation also, but they have not developed any mechanism to do a comprehensive, I can say, revision altogether about regarding to the implementation of their strategies also. And that is why it has been recommended also in few of the papers, and I've also recommended in one of my paper that a special rapporteur is important, which a CBD has to play a very important role. The time has come that a comprehensive strategy has to be adopted by these leading institutions also, so that a harmonious construction has been can be developed also. For example, the International Treaty of Plants and Developments are working on farmers' rights also. They're discussing about portfolios which can resolve the disputes within the farmers with regard to benefit sharing. However, the CBD, the bodies like CBD, Conventional Biological Diversity, and even the Nagoya Protocol have put onus upon the ratifying countries also. You resolve your own disputes. And that is why we have seen number of challenges in our country also. Even the bodies like National Biological Authority and the State Biodiversity Authority also have faced a lot of challenge, even resolving those benefit sharing disputes also. Who are the real benefit sharing claimants also? What will be the mode of benefit sharing claimants altogether? How it can be done also? Now, on this issue, Nagoya Protocol has not given very clarity altogether. But yes, the attempt has been made by the state authorities in the rules and regulation also. To a certain extent, yes, it has played a very important role in resolving the disputes also. But you see, when you talk in the period, when you're talking about transformative constitutionalism, when you're talking about constitutional morality, it is very much important to understand the limitation of not only the legislative body, but also of judicial bodies also. We have seen the recent environment impact assessment also, which has been the draft which has come all together, and which shows the limited scope of public participation in this environment impact assessment also. And the scholars like all of us have raised the issue that how it is very much important to introduce this concept also. There have been many recent judgments which has given also that how the eviction of the right of shelter, which has been violated altogether, of people who are living in the roadside also, in the slums area. So those judgments, of course, has actually reminded us that yes, there is a need of judicial activism also. So that is why I'm talking about this idea of global peace, maybe in the regard of protection of biodiversity, maybe in the regard to protection of forest also, is very much important in the line of recognizing the rights of indigenous societies also. And that's how that seems to play a very important role. How a strategic plan which has been created by different forums may play a very important role. We have a body like Indian Council of Agricultural Research also, which has to play a very important role in entry into different kind of bioprospecting agreement and the other kind of agreements also. But whether the existing law related to bioprospecting has been recognized anywhere explicitly in any international legal instrument, answer is no. So that is why this idea is also very much important. When you see the apprehension of a dispute which may affect the peace, which may affect the overall, I can say, the dimension or the necessity foundation of inclusive growth, we have to define the concept also. So in this context, you see how in this post-pandemic policy must work not towards the human capital, but it also must towards the social capital also. And that is why we expect that any kind of economic modeling must depict the realistic limits of the degree in which this human capital has been utilized also. And that is why it is also very much important altogether that we need to understand that how this sustainability can actually work in this kind of economic development also. So this is something very much important altogether. And I'm sure in the near future, we can work upon the multilateralism, which seems to be very important even today. Our Prime Minister of India have discussed about the significance of multilateralism also, that how multilateralism seems to be important if it can be adopted in an inclusive and a resilient manner also. So in that context, yes, especially with regard to the free trade agreements, especially with regard to other kind of economic bilateral or in the investment treaties where the biological resources may be appropriated, may be subject matter of commercializations, then in those cases, these kind of treaties can play a very important role. So it is very much important for researchers like us or the stakeholders also, where they can refocus upon the nature-based solutions also, to conserve, to restore, and to maintain natural resources also. The health of ecosystem, as I said earlier, also seems to be very important in nature also. So that is the idea which I'm trying to reflect, that how whatever the loss what are the reasons of biological diversity loss factors we have analyzed also, it is very much important to increase the knowledge base also. It is very much important to understand the issues of innovations which we are taking all together. So maybe in that line, we can realign our incentives, which we have also. Maybe we can strategize our better monitoring tools altogether, that how the kind of peace building biodiversity initiative which has been taken by the conservation of biological diversity may play a very important role. So this is the area which we need to ponder all together, that it has become very much important. Sir, over to you. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Professor Dr. Zubair. I think you were very vibrant, and I believe that you have a message. The message is to all those who talk of development, let them understand the nuances of development, not merely a slogan. It should be working on the ground, doing a lot of homework, with clear perceptions about things, and above all, to be kind to everybody's life, dignity, honor, and let everybody live with dignity on this planet Earth. Thank you so much. and we'll be definitely having a good paper from you for publication. Thank you, Zubair. And now we are having a scholar from Jada University, and she is Rubina Sultana. Rubina is a scholar in philosophy and very keen and eager to contribute to human development and then give good ideas for making world better for all human beings and more so for oppressed women. That's how she is going to speak about to secure global peace, and women should be the partners. I must tell you that if men work for peace, that's also a contribution of women, because it's only the women who bring up men. So they should bring up very good men to contribute to peace. Rubina is now with Jadavpur University, and I request her to please speak and give your contribution to the conference. And after that, we'll be going for the valedictory session without any break. Now, please, Rubina.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for these kind words. So first of all, a very good noon to all of you. It is an honor to present my paper in front of you. Thank you, Institute of Objective Studies, and sir, for giving me this opportunity. Sir, my topic is the role of women to secure global peace and analysis of the role of Sustainable Development Goal, Target 5, which is gender equality. In our society, women play a central role in building and maintaining harmony within the family and strengthening social cohesion within communities. The Global Peace Foundation seeks to engage women and other stakeholders as a fundamental resource, stakeholders to create a supportive cultural environment to strengthen and empower women's participation as a fundamental resource in advancing peace and human development. The Sustaining Peace Framework and the 230 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals share common principles such as national ownership, inclusivity, universality, people-centered approaches, and a call for coherent implementation across the three United Nations pillars, which are economic development, social development, and environmental development. Inclusive, transparent, and effective decision making and respect the rule of law are critical for achieving the SDGs and for sustaining peace. To illustrate the preventive potential of the SDGs, my paper will focus on Target 5 out of the 17 goals. 5, which aims to secure women's full and effective participation and equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of decision making in political, economic, and social, as well as public life. For an example, Iceland is ranked as the most peaceful country according to the Global Peace Index and is also ranked first in the World Economic Forum's Gender Gap Index 2020, where India is ranked 139th. Though the Constitution of India grants equality to women, ensures equality before law, and prohibits discrimination against any citizen on the basis of religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth. We see over the past 20 years, United Nations peace operations have made progress towards gender equality. So the implementation of Target 5 involves diverse indicators, which range from perception of gender roles to education access and economic opportunity. States are drafting and adopting plans to translate and incorporate the SDGs into their national strategies, and in so doing have started developing further strategies to fully integrate women in policy and practices. Despite increased attention to women's sidelining in matters related to peace and conflict, Following the adoption to UN Resolution 1325, women continue to be marginalized in peace building missions, peace negotiations, and peace building processes. Between 1990 and 2017, women constituted only 2% of mediators, 8% of negotiators, and 5% of witnesses and signatories in all major peace processes. In 2017, women made up just 10% of UN peacekeeping police personnel and 4% of military peacekeepers. So I think there is need to increase participation of women in all spheres to secure our global peace and development. So here are some recommendations which will have to secure global peace. Firstly, we can say that we need to enhance women political participation in governance and grassroots politics. As we all know that the current system of reserve seats creates gaps for women meaningful participation. For an example, in Pakistan, women are not elected directly. As Sabah Gul Khatak, one of the best scholars from Pakistan, she said that they don't have the same authority, financial clout, or voice on the councils as male representatives. Secondly, we need to support women's network locally and regionally, and also take a gendered response to crisis. For an example, women healthcare services, police services, legal and judiciary services. Thirdly, the vital role and the major role is the role of media. The media's ability to change stereotypes and harness support to address pressing issues across the country gives it a critical role in furthering the agenda. Members of the media need to make conscious and serious efforts to change stereotypes in society. Debates on foreign policy, national security, and economy, for example, rarely include women, only rarely. Women need to be provided adequate space and opportunities to discuss wider issues related to peace and security and foreign policy. And lastly, the major thing is that we need to engage youth, that men and boys play a significant role in creating equal opportunities for women and girls. And in furthering the gender equality agenda, both young men and women need to be provided with social and political forums in which they can engage in dialogue and discussion on matters related to national security and foreign policy. So political parties need to commit to developing young leaders of the future by bringing young people into decision making and ensuring that they are engaged more effectively within the parties. So we can see that the portrayal of women solely are vulnerable victims of conflict, which affects their participation. So I would like to conclude by saying that the last 2 decades have in many ways have a period where women's role in peace and conflict matters have received much needed attention in both academic and policy circles. Yet while the adoption of Resolution 1325 also raised hopes for more gender equal peacekeeping and peace building. Nonetheless, the cooperation of women with men as co-architecture of the re-emerging society is fundamentally important to bring just and lasting peace in conflict-affected areas. Women leadership role at the stage of peace negotiation in governance and in security and legal sectors contributes to this effect. Women's role in any sphere is relevant because one of their unique capacity to serve as a bridge to mobilize divided groups for peace. Women presidents of sustainable peace over the struggle for power assist to bring unique women and other social needs to attention. Moreover, their participation in governance fosters equal participation of women in social, economic, and political discourses. So the presence of patriarchal society, however, somehow curtails women's crucial role in social construction. So lastly, therefore, it is necessary to ensure gender mainstreaming at the regional, national, and international level to secure global peace and development. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Hello.
Thank you so much, Robina. We wish you a very great career.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And
Thank you
become
very
a
much.
very good peace activist and contribute to world peace. I believe that all that gender disparities will go in due course of time. So, dear friends, would you like to have one or two questions if anybody is, or from the participants, if somebody would give a short comment before we get to the valedictory session? I think that scholars have been so comprehensive, and we intend to have a continuous dialogue on the issues. So we formally begin with the valedictory session, and as we are having the senior member of the academic community in India, Professor Zadam Khan, with us. Skipping all protocols, I would like that he chairs this session, and at the end he gives a few presidential remarks and his impressions. I take up the task to save time, which I had assigned to Dr. Zubair and Dr. Vandana to give a brief about the conference. I'm doing it very briefly. This conference, which was conceived with pure academic idea, that academic community should always give its thoughts and expressions to the human community about happenings in the world. And that's it's one part of it, and we have tried to do that. It started yesterday at 10 a.m. With the recitations from the Holy Quran, and then Professor Zadam Khan, he welcomed the guests, and then I did present the theme of it by referring to various kinds of miseries which are happening in the world. I referred to the conflicts. I believe they don't have any substantive kind of basis. I believe those all the conflicts which are existing presently in the world are either based on some kinds of false egos, some kinds of shallow kinds of considerations. And if one gets to the mind and gets to humanity, all the conflicts can be resolved by that. And then we had our chief guest from United States of America, Professor Dr. Bruce W. Dayton, and he is professor and chair of Master of Arts in Peace and Justice Leadership, the Master of Diplomacy and International Relations and Executive Director of the Contact Peace Building Program at the School of International Training, Vermont, USA. He did, tell us that we have to give up many considerations to build peace, and we should have the peace, that cosmopolitan view. As we talk of the world view, we should have the peace world view. And for that, we will have to shun shallow kinds of different isms and like that, whatever we find is emerging around without any reason and rationality. And then we had a special address by Dr. Anna Pentedo, and she talked about the management of intellectual property rights, as most of the disputes in future will be on the basis of intellectual property rights. We wanted to take precedence and see that how world is going to manage the conflicts which will be emerging on the basis of intellectual property rights. And then we had a discourse from Professor Dr. Manoj Kumar Sinha. He is director of Indian Law Institute, and he underscored the various challenges which we find are coming in the way of establishing global peace. And he referred to various international instruments and documents, aspirations and hopes which people of the world have. And that's how he gave a very expert kind of discourse on the subject. Then we had a special narration from Professor Dr. Zaliha Kamaruddin. She was formerly rector of International Islamic University in Malaysia and is still a very active contributor to academics. She talked of Security Council Resolution number 1325, which is about women, peace and security. And I think that's a very good kind of resolution which the world should notice, and then especially the women should take a note of it, and then they can become very good contributors to the promotion of peace. Especially their participation should be ensured. We have to be gender friendly everywhere, at home, on the way, in office, anywhere. We have to be gender friendly. And then we had words of appreciation from Dr. Manzoor Alam. He has always encouraged the academics to get to the objective studies and contribute towards the development of knowledge very objectively, shunning bias and any kind of epistemological biases and other biases. Then we started the first session under the chairmanship of Professor Zadam Khan, and we had a good delivery from Professor Dr. Queenie Pradhan Singh, and she explained to us the period when, interwar, during the interwar years, how peace initiatives were taking the birth, and that ultimately resulted into a new thought. And we had later on League of Nations, and on the failure of that, we did have then the United Nations organization. And then we had also Professor Mirza Asmar Beg also in the same session, and he spoke about the dynamics of all whatever was happening. He's a very good political scientist, and he was talking from the strategic point of view that how the nation states were behaving, how communities were behaving, and how things were happening during that period, which was nothing less than a horrendous hell, we can see. And then I did talk about, I am Professor M. Afzalwani. I said that UN Charter is, giving very good foundations for building peace in its preamble, and also it provides a very good ground for institutional developments and then implementation of the policies which needs to be marked well. And we had a question from Advocate Janab Arshad Andrabi that how, we can see the people who are suffering within their nations approaching the international bodies. Then we know that we have to have a mechanism. I think the present mechanism is not enough. We have to have the mechanisms where people facing genocide, where people facing, oppressions, they must have a better mechanism for having access to world bodies, so that we really establish peace, not only in the form of absence of war, but also as a process for improving the culture of dignity, human dignity in the world. As God says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي Adam, I have given respect to the human being, and we should also work effectively to promote the dignity and respect of human beings. Then in the next session, which was chaired by Professor Datu, Dr. Zaliha Kamaruddin, and then the first speaker there was Professor Sanjay Singh. He talked about the responsibilities of nation states at home and across the board, that how they should promote peace and work for that through cooperation and and like that. And we had Professor Dr. Asad Malik from Jamia Millia Islamia, and he spoke on that how within national jurisdictions, the nation states should work for establishment of peace, harmonic societies, and then bring in a culture where we find that everybody is living a dignified life with peace and prosperity. We had with us Dr. Khalid Wasim Hassan from Central University of Kashmir, and he spoke on the underlying underlying principles of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and he gave us many ideas about making them effective, and he talked about their relevance, and then he was emphasizing on promotion of strategies for giving them a better effect. And also he was stressing that we should avoid any kinds of exploitations or any kinds of deviances to ensure better and sincere compliance with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We had with us Professor P. Puneet from Jawaharlal Nehru University School of Law and Governance. He gave a very brilliant presentation, and he scored out various foundations which we find in International Covenant and Civil and Political Rights and other declarations. And he was very meticulous in ensuring the promotion of peace in the light of the standards established in those international instruments. Then we had one more session, third, wherein we had Professor Dr. Govind Singh Raj Parohit and Dr. Abhishek Kumar Tiwari from Rajasthan University, and they spoke on International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, which has been adopted to bring peace at home to anybody. And that's how when we talk of poverty, poverty of knowledge, poverty of literacy, poverty of bread, poverty of dignity, and that's how this International Covenant on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights 1966 should be taken very seriously by the nation states, and within their jurisdictions they must promote economic welfare, social welfare, and promote culture of peace, tolerance, and then culture of human dignity in the least. And then we had Professor Anuj Kumar Vaksha from University School of Law and Legal Studies, religious IP University, Dwarka, Delhi, and he spoke on global justice, and there he underscored that how many people are facing justice at individual level, at group level, at cultural level, and as regards economic operations, as regards political subjugations. And that's how the institutions working under the United Nations and the institutions working under the nation states, they should be strong enough. They should be well enough to position themselves to the situations where they bring justice to any individual, to any group of people, and then also to promote it as a permanent kind of process for peace building at home and abroad. Then we had with us Dr. Professor Batul Zahur Qazi from Maldives National University, and she talked of gender equality and women's empowerment, and in a very forceful presentation she did underline the various issues which come in the way of participation of women in contributing to peace. And then I think she referred to the very enriched brain power or mind power, and then also their compassion, the women's compassion, that how that can better bring peace to the world, and they can cradle today's humanity and bring it up with peace perspectives for a very bright future. Thank you. And then we had a session today with Dr. Nafis Ahmed from South Asian University, and he talked about the refugees, and we have this as a big problem. He did discuss in a very detailed manner about the issues, about the mindset, about the this coming up of the laws, and then at the same time he suggested solutions, how to grapple with the problems, and that's how we find that this was a very important presentation from the point of view of refugees, which is currently creating many issues, and it is a challenge to the present-day human society. We had Dr. Iqbal Ahmed with us, and from National Law University, Delhi, and he spoke on human trafficking prosecutional issues, and I believe that he was very much justified in saying that unless we have a very effective prosecutional mechanism for these purposes, and investigation, and then a will to bring peace to the people, and then trace out all the roots of human trafficking, till then this problem can go, and human beings are quite responsible, and nation states should behave responsibly, because it's a big human problem. This modern enslavement, you cannot, the world cannot claim they have ended with slavery. They have given birth to another mode of slavery, the worst one in the form of human trafficking. It needs to be addressed with might. And then we had Professor Dr. Vanna Singh with us, again from University School of Law and Legal Studies, and she talked about Reaganomics and the promotion of peace, where there is a good model for anybody, that whenever this is an invitation rather to the mind, that you keep always thinking about global peace. And I would say it's an invitation to all the heads of states, whether the presidents or prime ministers, that they should more think of peace at home and peace across the board, because the position is not of power, the position is of functioning, and functioning should be for establishment of peace. I say, taking 1 minute, I may say that when Montesquieu was giving the theory of separation of powers, he was talking of separation of powers, he was focusing on powers, because he had lived a life under the feudalism. He had lived a life when there was a lot of exploitation. He was living a life when there was not any kind of constitutionalism. He was living a life when there was not anything like human rights regime. And that's why he talked of powers, powers, and powers. I believe that today, giving a counter thesis to Montesquieu, that we have, I and Professor Vani is living in the era of constitutionalism. Democracy, human dignity, and honor for humanity. So any authority, any bureaucrat, any legislator, any head of state has to focus not on power, but on functions. And if he has the power, power is not to exploit, power is to function. You have to function. And that's how I believe that as Dr. Vanna Singh's presentation is an invitation to all these heads of states, whether presidents or prime ministers, they must look to it that by their functioning, they bring peace, serenity, and advance humanity for every individual, right from a single individual to a group of individuals, and to those who are enjoying material wealth, and to those who are without material wealth, to haves and have-nots equally, to men and women equally, and to believers of any faith equally, and to any holding any political or any other opinions equally. They have to bring peace to all minds and all situations. And then we had Dr. Parikshit Sirohi from Faculty of Law, Delhi University. I think he stressed on poverty, and poverty can be eliminated under goal 1 of the Sustainable Development Goals of UN only and only by education, and education must be advanced in a very big way, and then only we can fight the poverty. And then Dr. Zubair Ahmad Khan from again US University School of Law and Legal Studies, he stressed on very important thing about protection of biological diversity and forests to sustain a peaceful world. And he was stressing the fact that all economic policies must be converging towards the protection of biological diversity. It should not be lopsided. It should not be only more profit making. It should not be exclusively the success of the schemes as people claim. It should be the success in the form of a cogent development and an inclusive development where not only few people, but most all the people, and also the environment is given its due, and biological diversity is maintained, then we can have a good way to peace. And we had then a very brilliant scholar from Jadhav University, Kolkata, Rubina Sultana, and she gave a brief presentation on participation of women to secure global peace. And she underlined there the role the women can play, and gave a hope that scholars like her can work in future for better academics oriented to the development of peace. And now we have with us one of the very great contributors of this, I should say, the present day world, from a very important nation state, Sri Lanka. He is Dr. Jayampathi Vikramaratne. He has been attorney at law and President's Council in Sri Lanka. At heart, he is an academician. He is an academic at heart, a very good thinker, sober, kind, friend of humanity. And I may say a few things about him. Dr. Jayampathi Vikramaratne joined Sri Lankan Bar in 1977 and was appointed President's Council in 2001. The principal area of his practice is public law. He obtained a master's degree in public administration from the Postgraduate Institute of Management, University of Sri Jayawardhanapura, with a merit pass specializing in development administration. He was awarded a PhD degree by the University of Peradeniya for his thesis on fundamental rights in Sri Lanka, on which this work is based. The University of Colombo awarded him a PhD degree for his published work titled Towards Democratic Governance in Sri Lanka, a Constitutional Miscellany. He has been a visiting scholar at McGill University, Canada, and a guest researcher at the Institute of Federalism, University of Freiburg, Switzerland. Dr. Vikramaratne was a member of parliament from September 2015 to January 2020 also. He was a member of the Committee on Standing Orders and chaired the Sectoral Oversight Committee on Legal Affairs and Media. In the Constitutional Assembly, he was a member of the Steering Committee, co-chair of its Management Committee, and a member of the Subcommittee on Fundamental Rights. He also chaired the committee that drafted the Right to Information Act, presently ranked the fourth strongest right to information law in the world. Dr. Vikramaratne has served as Senior Advisor, Constitutional Affairs to the President, Senior Advisor, Ministry of Constitutional Affairs, and Consultant, Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs in Sri Lanka. He was a member of the team that drafted the Constitution of Republic of Sri Lanka Bill 2000 and the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. Dr. Vikramaratne was also a member of the panel of experts appointed by the President to serve as the all-party representative committee and was a signatory to the majority report, which proposed a strong power-sharing arrangement as a solution to Sri Lanka's ethnic crisis. He chaired a committee appointed by the Inter-Ministerial Committee on Human Rights to draft a new constitutional Bill of Rights. He has extensive experience in the legal sector of law, having done many assignments on international law, human rights, legal reform, criminal justice, and human trafficking. Dr. Vikramaratne is a director of the Institute for Constitutional Studies, an organization working on constitutionalism, devolution, power sharing, and human rights in Sri Lanka. I think it is appropriate for him to address us when the 20th Amendment to the Constitution of Sri Lanka is very much there, and he is, spearheading everything, which is very fine. I believe that this will be not only the special address, this will be a super special address for us. It will encourage us, and he is speaking on importance of human rights in global peace in this valedictory session of this two-day conference. Over to you, Dr. Jayampathy Vikramaratne. Over.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. And it's a pleasure to be with you. This is the second time I'm joining one of your conferences. I was in New Delhi a few years back also. I might say that I come from Sri Lanka, but right now I'm in Switzerland. I join you from Switzerland, where I'm doing some academic work. I have a PowerPoint presentation. I wonder whether I can operate it from here or...
Yeah, permitted, please.
See that?
Okay, visible.
Okay. So I talk about the importance of human rights in global peace. Human rights, as almost all of you know, surely, this distinguished gathering knows, that it has been a part of the Sri Lanka, of the religious and cultural heritage of humans, and recognized in whether it's Buddhist scriptures, Hindu scriptures, Islamic scriptures, Hindu Shastras, Hebrew and Christian Bibles, you have always had a reference to human rights. But the modern concept of human rights is about a century old. Several treaties concluded after the World War I in the earlier part of the 20th century had human rights provisions. But it was the events of the atrocities of World War II that opened the eyes of humanity to the extent that it led to international recognition of human rights. Firstly, the European Convention of Human Rights and the establishment of the first multilateral court on human rights, the European Court of Human Rights. The United Nations Charter mentioning human rights, and of course the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is not a treaty but a General Assembly resolution, which is today recognized as customary international law. Now, the fact that modern human rights was recognized in this way after the two world wars, especially the Second World War, shows the obvious relationship between human rights and peace. Where you have human rights, it is more likely that you have peace. I'm not saying that all human rights, if there is complete recognition of human rights everywhere, there will be no violence or no wars. No, I'm not saying that. Now, the UN Charter, although it is a charter signed by states, it begins with "we the people." So it's the people acting through their states who established the United Nations Charter and the United Nations mechanisms. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was drafted by delegates from different cultural backgrounds, from different political backgrounds. And that gives that added value. And that is why it is now accepted today as customary international law. It represents the hard-won consensus of the international community, the entire international community. Now, I consider the inclusion of economic, social, and cultural rights. In addition to civil and political rights, the inclusion of social, economic, and cultural rights in the Universal Declaration marks a clear mark of progress in the sphere of human rights. Now, there are 9 human rights treaties which are recognized by the Secretary, which have been recognized by the Secretary General of the United Nations as being core human rights treaties. What are they? One on racial discrimination, economic, social, and cultural rights. The one that covers civil and political rights, we are very familiar with that. Discrimination against women, torture, children's rights, protection of migrant workers, rights of persons with disabilities, protection of persons from enforced disappearances. These 9 are considered the core treaties. There are, of course, a multitude of other treaties. Now, if at least the human rights recognized by these treaties are respected everywhere, again, I'm not saying that that will contribute to global peace. I mean, that will not necessarily result in global peace, that it would contribute. If human rights are respected by humanity, at least if the core human rights treaties are implemented, then it will contribute to global peace. This raises this whole question of the universality of human rights. There are these competing claims. The claim that human rights are universal and the claim of cultural relativism. People who believe in cultural relativism, they assert that human values vary according to cultural perspectives. Whereas people who are for universality say, no, they are universal. Now, the question is, can universal human rights exist in a culturally diverse world? Now, what are these practices that people who advance the theory of cultural relativism want to safeguard? For example, cultural practices, domestic violence against women, female genital mutilation, a big problem especially in Africa, forced marriages, honor killings find in our region as well. Now, can all these be permitted in the name of culture? So, universality is not cultural imperialism. Universal human rights do not impose one cultural standard, but they prescribe one legal standard. Not a cultural standard, but a single legal standard for the minimum protection necessary for human dignity. And again, like the UDHR, they represent the hard-won consensus of the international community. People forget that the Universal Declaration, in developing the Universal Declaration, developing countries like India at that time, very much, China, Chile, Cuba, Lebanon, Panama, they played a very active and highly influential part. In the covenants, in drafting the covenants on civil and political rights and economic and social and cultural rights, developing countries like Ghana and Nigeria from Africa made very important contributions. So they represent the wishes of the international community. Now, human rights violations often give rise to conflicts which have an international dimension. Most human rights violations spill over to other countries. Conflicts arise not only out of violations of civil and political rights, but also economic, social, economic, and cultural rights. And I was happy to hear the mention of social, economic, and cultural rights by earlier speakers. Conflicts arising out of violations on civil and political rights also give rise to violations of denials of social and economic rights. We found that in 2017, a few years back, 10 out of the 13 major food crises resulted from conflicts in the world. We have had dictatorships, naked dictators, where in whose countries there are human rights violations, and then of course so-called constitutional authoritarian regimes, which also contribute to, which also have been worse. They have been the worst offenders. But it is also in the so-called democratic world. Violations happen in the so-called democratic world also, and therefore threaten global peace. Now, the international dimension of human rights violations, we've seen this in our part of the world. Everywhere, large-scale violations leading to international involvement. Take the refugee crisis in Myanmar. Over 1 million Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. In Syria, the conflict in Syria has led to 6 million refugees and therefore international involvement. Take my own country. Our inability to solve the ethnic crisis in Sri Lanka. India had to receive 1.34 lakhs of Sri Lankan refugees in a space of 5 years. And even today, India hosts more than 50,000 Sri Lankan refugees. You can see, therefore, the international dimension of human rights. Added to this is superpower double standards. Superpowers creating conflicts, catalyzing conflicts, and sometimes not allowing conflicts to be solved, but on the other hand, festering such conflicts. Double standards you find everywhere. I want to specifically mention the ethnic conflicts as a major threat to peace, coming from a country which has had a 30-year-old separatist war. The separatist war in Sri Lanka is over, but the conflict remains because the causes of the conflict have still not been addressed. Now, most ethnic conflicts arise out of the denial of the rights of numerically smaller communities. I don't like to like the phrase minorities. I prefer saying numerically smaller communities to take part in government, especially the geographically concentrated smaller communities who always, I mean, no country, I mean, I'm yet to hear of a geographically concentrated community saying we don't want devolution, we don't want power sharing. No, every community wants a share of state power. And majorities, almost everywhere, at least initially, exhibit majoritarianism and reject any idea of power sharing. Of course, Sri Lanka, again, an example. A very bad example is the former Yugoslavia, which led to the complete dismemberment of Yugoslavia. Find now 7 or 8 states. But some countries, some majorities, while all majorities have been exhibiting majoritarianism, some majorities have come to realize the need to restructure their respective states and being able to arrest the conflict going into a worse situation. Very good example is Belgium. 50, 60 years back, it was a unitary state, and now to manage the ethnic tensions, it restructured itself and is now a federal state. Spain, from a unitary state to a devolved structure. Still not completely solved. You have the example of Catalonia and the Basque region, and you see the center trying to interfere in the affairs of the devolved structures, and therefore problem is still not solved. United Kingdom, unitary in theory. We used to call the United Kingdom the mother of all unitary states. But now you have a virtually federal state. Unitary in theory, but you have in Scotland, in Northern Ireland, and even in Wales, different levels of devolution, power sharing, and a prime example of a unitary state restructuring itself, and therefore, being able to manage the conflict is the United Kingdom. And of course, we had a very bad experience of South Africa, plain maker discrimination during the apartheid days. Again, developing into a international conflict where the international actors got involved in a big way. Of course, nations talk about sovereignty. But I want to emphasize that sovereignty is not a defense for breaches of gross human rights violations. Rather than pitting sovereignty against human rights, it's not sovereignty versus human rights. We should be able to have them together, sovereignty and human rights. In the exercise of our sovereignty, respect human rights in our respective states. In the exercise of our sovereignty, ensure that human rights in our countries are respected, and they are thereby contribute to peace. Peace in your own country, peace globally. And I think there is a need for regional human rights mechanisms. We found one in Europe working very well, in Africa to some extent, in the Americas. There is now a Southeast Asian mechanism being talked about. What about South Asia? Of course, we are a diverse region. We have different kinds of cultures, all that. But still, it will still be a challenge. But if we can someday, not in the too distant future, and I think the time is right now to start about a South Asian mechanism of human rights, and that I would argue would contribute to peace in the region and therefore peace globally. Then double standards of states. You have double standards of states, inconsistent behavior of states, political and economic considerations getting involved. The unfortunate imbalance you find in the United Nations, the veto power, the domination of permanent members, deals between states. Sometimes the inability of the UN to act, example is Rwanda. If the UN had acted in time, thousands of lakhs of lives would have been saved, and therefore the necessity to democratize the United Nations. So these are some of the issues that I wanted to flag. Human rights, respect of human rights, respect for human rights domestically will help peace domestically and also contribute to peace internationally. I thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you. Thank you very much again.
Jayapanthi Vikrama Ratne Sahab. I believe Dr. Vikrama Ratne gave us a very, very brief on the importance of human rights for global peace. And he was very correct when he says sovereignty has to go with human rights, and human rights have to go with sovereignty. They cannot be separated, but I would add from my side another term, which I always use: there has to be sovereignty of human rights. And sovereignty of human rights is what anybody should talk about now, with all kinds of cultural variations, even if there are there. But human rights have to be sovereign, and any state, any kingdom, any tribal order, or any kind of other kind of legal entity that takes birth only for human good, rendering service to humanity, promoting humanity. And then I think we are grateful to Dr. Jayampathy Vikarmaratne for this thing also, that he is traveling, he is on an academic assignment to Switzerland, and from Switzerland, he agreed to join with us. That shows that human rights are very dear to him. And we believe that he will definitely succeed in protecting human rights of all in Sri Lanka in particular and elsewhere in general. And we wish him to be recognized as a global human rights leader. And we are grateful to you for all that. Now we are having with us one of the very vibrant scholars who has been in human rights for the last quarter a century. And his concerns begin with gender. And he started long back working in 1996 on Girl Child in Crisis and the Institute of Social Society. In Delhi, there is one institute, that's Institute of Social Studies. They published his first book on Girl Child in Crisis. And then he had no end to it, and he got the Ford Foundation Fellowship. He did his then LLM from London, and then he traveled across the globe, attending programs and kept writing unabatedly on human rights issues, covering various areas in the world, and then headed some institutions, and also he taught law in some colleges and universities, and also he trained scholars across the globe in human rights, especially in healthcare and health as a human rights issue. And he was a director also with SIT USA, and then he is presently dean of one of the important universities in Maharashtra, Vijaypet University, probably I remember that. And then he is a very good at heart associated with human rights campaigning. In him, I find a very seasoned kind of scholar who can be a very good contributor to development of this human rights perspectives in the country. And at the same time, he's a very fine patriot. And at the same time, he has hold on many disciplines, many subjects, and he is a good academic leader. He, across the cultures, he can show his talent and contribute. And I mean, he is Professor Dr. Azim A. Khan Shirwani. I request him to deliver the valedictory address for this conference. Professor Dr. Azim.
Thank you very much, Professor Wani Sai. It is a real delight and pleasure to be with all of you. Unfortunately, I could not join yesterday because of my travels. But you did a great job when you were summarizing presentations from yesterday. And I thoroughly enjoyed hearing our colleagues, Dr. Vandana Singh, then Dr. Sirohi, Dr. Zubair Khan, Ms. Sultana, and just before my session, listening, Vikramaratne, Vikramaratne was actually a delight. And I must congratulate Indian Objective Studies that has like brought so many brilliant minds. Of course, Professor Wani Sahib, Professor Z.M. Khan Sahib, and many other people that have been brought by Dr. Manzoor Alam Sahib. And this Indian Objective Studies has led several research, advocacy studies, and has contributed tremendously in India, in South Asian context and global context. So when I was hearing Dr. Vandana and Dr. Sirohi, Dr. Vandana mentioning about Reaganomics and how misleading this policy was, and where it led to US. And it is certainly, it has proved to be an antithesis of what global human rights or global peace requires. The US is the only country probably in the world that recognizes healthcare as business. If you ask this question to anybody, I mean, who may not have gone to any university or college, will not accept that healthcare is a business. But thanks to Reaganomics, that the U.S. government, if you look at what they are spending per person per year, it is more than $10,000 per person per year on healthcare. And if you look at the data that is from OSCE, that includes like 13 countries that are developed countries, that are high income countries. US finds like 7th, 9th in most of the rankings. And why they are not still on the top when they spend this much amount? And when it comes to capitalism, I mean, we often see argument that actually capitalism is good for development. Capitalism is a great model. I'm not against capitalism. I'm not, into these ideologies. But what I see is the capitalism that is practiced in Scandinavian countries, a better model, because they are not just using this privatization, liberalization, and globalization of economies, but they are also insisting and focusing a lot on human rights, on peace. So in these Scandinavian countries model, if you look at it from cradle to grave, everything is taken care of by a state. They have very high level of taxation, but probably this is a good governance, global governance model to look at. And, we all know that without peace, without global peace, we cannot attain sustainability. And for any society, even at the lowest level, that is family. I mean, if there is no peace in the family, it is very difficult for this family to live, good and prosperous life. And it is very important that, we develop, as Professor Wani will say, culture of peace, culture of negotiation, culture of inclusion, culture of pluralism. Starting from family, going up to United Nations or group of nations. So it is very important that we approach development in this ways. I mean, look at the data. What is happening? If we put together the world's economy together, the total GDP will be close to $110 trillion. I mean, it must have gone down in the last few months because of the pandemic, but we had $110 trillion economy if we put together. And if we just spend $60 billion more on healthcare, what we already spend, all over the world, it will ensure that every human on this planet has access to primary and basic healthcare. That will be a fantastic thing. Now look at it. How much will be like $60 billion will be like 0.6% of the total GDP that we have, which is like literally nothing. If we add $40 billion to the total education budget that we spend all over the world, it will ensure that every child up to the age of 18 years receives primary and secondary education. So as a global community, we need to think, why can't we do it? We have international institutions, and United Nations is there, and then our famous scholar and guru of MDGs, and then now Sustainable Development Goals, Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, who has also led Earth Institute at Columbia University. He's coming up with these goals, but how are we going to achieve these goals until and unless we move away from the personal greeds, when we start believing in culture of human rights, culture of democracy, culture of inclusion? These are fundamental questions that we need to ask ourselves, irrespective of our polity, irrespective of ideology that we associate with. We need to find a common ground where we can sit together, where we can engage, where we can debate how we can find global peace, how we can develop global peace in a world order where actually every human thrives, where we are truly in a position to achieve the standards that were declared in Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or what our Constitution of India or Constitution of US or other countries prescribe or aspires to. So these are very important issues that we need to address. I was also blown off with what the depth and breadth of the presentation in this international conference. I mean, it addressed all kind of issues, from governance to constitutionalism to human rights to environmental issues, climate change issues, then gender issues. So this is a great initiative, and I must congratulate Professor M. Afzal Sahib, Indian Social Institute, and everyone who has been associated in organizing this program. And I want to, re-emphasize here that we need to understand, develop, and practice the words that have been available with us. I mean, look at what Prophet Muhammad Sahib said, whether it is in terms of peace, in terms of conflict resolution, in terms of human rights, in terms of justice, social justice, economic justice, political justice. We need to read, understand, and practice what Gandhi said. He was one of the great advocates of peace, world peace, global peace. We need to look at Martin Luther King's work, and most recently what Nelson Mandela had done. Imagine a leader who was put in prison for so many years, who might have developed hatred for the regime that has put him in the prison in worst conditions. He came out with the idea of peace. He came out with idea of dialogue. He came out with the idea of engagement, even with people who are opposing you, who are hell-bent to destroy you. Imagine if Mandela was not visionary. There would have been so much violence in just transfer of power in South Africa. I mean, I'm not saying that, there are no issues in South Africa politically or otherwise today, but it is much more stable than, any African country. I mean, in that region, and especially a country that had a history of racial discrimination, blatant violence against, blacks of South Africa. So we need to learn these lessons, and we need to put it in practice. Another point I want to make here, using this time, and I'm very mindful of the time that, everybody, we are running a little bit of late, that, being an academic is being an academic is a responsibility. It brings duty with this position that we actually connect to people. We are not just like writing books, articles, or theorizing in the classes. Rather, we should get into our area, and then we need to practice this. And I prefer if professors, researchers, lawyers, they are more organically connected with the communities, with individuals. And I think it will be a great idea to start a platform, a global platform to develop, to promote peace, global peace, in the leadership of Indian Objective Studies, that has a lot of great connections, international connections, and also it is committed for the development of peace, development of human rights, and development of social justice. I mean, in next 50 years, there will be 3 buzzwords that will dominate, development or sustainable development. And these 3 words will be justice, peace, and sustainability. I mean, a lot of our friends might argue that, all these things are actually part of justice, or these are part of peace, or these are part of sustainability. So whatever way we understand, depending on which, stream or field we come from, but these 3 words are going to dominate as, other sides like, data science and artificial intelligence is going to dominate technology part. So we need to harmonize these topics, and we need to put together, a center that is dedicated to the research of global peace, and then we need to have a platform that actually engages communities, organizations, countries in practicing global peace, and then we promote peace through school education as well. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be with all of you and be part of this great initiative. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Professor Dr. Azim Khan Shirwani. We have noted justice, peace, and sustainability. I think all technologies must be supportive to it. They must be used for promoting justice, for promoting peace, and promoting sustainability, rather than having their lopsided uses and then selfish uses and promoting crony kinds of thoughts and actions. You were very exhaustive on this thing, and we'll be waiting for your address for publication also. So that, and we are grateful to you for your words of encouragement for the Institute, appreciation for the Institute, and Institute will definitely work and continue to work as per its objectives, to have objective studies, and then objective studies leading to promotion of good academics, promotion of good culture, and promotion of betterment for humanity. Now I'm going to read out few resolutions. As you know, we had, I said in the beginning that there have been heroes in humanity, and they have been reminding people of various ideals related to peace, as you just talked about. Mr. Mandela, he was a reminder to humanity for something. And I say in clear terms that please don't wait for any avatars and prophets now. Now it is the professors and then activists who have to remind to the humanity from time to time that you are human. you act as human, you behave as human, you maintain humanity, you make humanity sustain. You have had the agendas for humanity. Please do it. And this conference was also a reminder. I believe a beginning of many more programs which will be devoted to specialized themes, maybe education and health, then many economic issues, and earning and spending, if I call it, and then having even family as a basic institution is also having so many challenges. That's how we are going for that. I've just drafted few resolutions in the light of the discussions which were taking place, and I've put things in context. And I may say I'll be reading them, but these are very long sentences. So somehow, if anybody will have some more suggestion later on, he can communicate to us. But I'll read out them quickly. I would say that whereas the people of the United Nations have determined in 1945, after 2 world wars, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind, and we reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights and in human dignity. So the Institute of Objective Studies, New Delhi, organized a 2-day international conference to discuss the relevant issues and outcome with the observations, thought of eminent members of academia, and for the consideration of world community. The conference accordingly resolves that pursuant to loss and devastation of over 100 million lives in the First and Second World War, causing emergence of inane parochial leanings of self-aggrandizement, unimaginable damage to natural earnestness of human desire to live in the world with variety and harmony, the human community is duty-bound to repeatedly look into the reasons for intra- and interstate conflicts, causing such horrendous tragedies in the form of merciless killings of military and civilian people, rape and murder of women, butchery of children, destruction of environment, nourishing of acrimony and hate, economic imbalances, political supremacies, undermining of process of justice and genocide, coupled with unconscionable destruction of fauna and flora, resulting into smacking of Mother Nature and visible environment. So the humanity must keep this thing always in mind, we assert. Then harnessing, number 2, harnessing false instincts and shallow whimsical aspirations led with motivated arousing of frivolous political, social, and economic conflicts, pushing human groups to extremes and positions of extermination must be wisely managed through cooperation and coordination with the human spirit of survival for all, rather than political gimmicks and malice, following a cosmopolitan worldview with proper identification of principal foundations for global peace, escaping unreal situations of genetic differences. Institutional mechanisms developed by the global community through United Nations after the world wars, national independent judicial systems, promotional initiatives through welfare agencies, availing of opportunities for redress of grievances under the national and international systems should be conscientiously respected to build peace and promote harmony for better future of humanity at home and abroad for all, containing the contemporary violence to all individual and group members of humanity with transparent, effective, and timely action. Next, culture of ease for business and employment, reassertion and self-determination, resettlement, relocation, intellectual endeavors, and social aspirational reorientations should be facilitated with enormously required international understanding as in the case of India envisaged in Article 51 of the Constitution of India. Development of societies with social peace and spirit of communal harmony and community service as a hallmark, following standards stated in international instruments like Declaration on the Essentials of Peace 1949 and the Declaration on the Preparation of Societies for Life in Peace 1978 should be ensured, addressing needs of the people, which recognize the preferment and paramount position of human dignity and other human rights as important essentials of peace to enable people to live in peace. Next is appreciating oneness of humanity. The UN and all nation states should overtly stand for values of human rights, promotion of human dignity, equality, and mutual respect, eliminating the evil, torturous situations faced by the world in the form of child exploitation, human trafficking, rape of women, racial or forms and other forms of discrimination, statelessness, starvation, illiteracy, bonded serfdom, exploitative commercial engagements, or any other forms of inhuman practices. I'll be adding the word about maintenance of better health, that will be added. And the next is sufficient literacy and campaigning by international agencies and nation states should be carried out across the globe against extremism, terrorism, hate, exclusion by the public functionaries and private individuals in any context, more by dispelling reactionaries and promotion of right thinking and expression. And the next is, eighth is, the literature in the world cultures should be presented in its true peace context and accommodative contours. And ninth is, iOS should take initiatives with UN agencies and nation states to promote academic engagements with studies in peace and harmony within societies and internationally. So I would say that if there will be any suggestion within this framework of the conference, we can accommodate that. But at the same time, I request the participants to say a yes to these resolutions so that we carry forward the mission and we put the things in right perspective. So should we take these as adopted?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much. And then now I am going to get to Professor Zadem Khan, our Secretary General. He will give his presidential remarks for the session, and then we'll go for vote of thanks and then part for meeting again in the next program. Professor Zadem Khan.
Thank you, Professor Wani. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Nahmadu nusalli Rasul al-Kareem. Let me at the outset appreciate and congratulate Professor Wani that he has done the whole thing so single-handedly with the help of the office, because I was not available to him the way I should have been. And I appreciate from the core of my heart that he has done the job in the best possible manner. So far as the commitment of iOS in terms of prevalence of peace, maintenance of peace is concerned, we are doing this exercise since quite long. The first international conference and the second and the third, they are taking place since 2016 onwards. And we have got a lot of resolutions passed by different conferences, and we have classified those resolutions and trying to approach the implementing agencies so that this whole thing is taken up. I will not take much time because it is already 2 o'clock, But I would say one thing certainly, that the violence is really taking new forms, and these have to be looked into very carefully. Instead of inter-state thing, now it is intra-state violence that is taking place. And violence in certain situations is being used as tool of converting public opinion in one form or the other. And that is why so many new kinds of assertions are there: the cultural violence assertion, structural violence assertion, direct violence assertions. And these assertions have to be met out with a lot of commitment at everybody's behalf. Second point I would like to mention is that now the character of violence has involved the civilians more than the defense forces, because the civilians are really the targets of all kinds of violence, and it can be conducted in a limited sense also, in a region, within a community, within a group or anything of that sort. So that should be looked into very carefully, and that is possible only when the real victim, that is the civil society, that comes up and takes up the issue. If civil society takes up the issue, only then the whole lot of mechanism that prompts or conducts this kind of violence will take lessons out of it. So civil society has to come up, and one of the encouraging situation is that the international opinion is being legitimized slowly and gradually in favor of peace. If these elements are taken into consideration, and the academia and all kinds of leadership in the society, they all take up these projects, then certainly you have got a better future before you, and peace can really be restored. One last point I would like to make, that peace does not establish without commitment. And this commitment comes out of your spiritual moral existence that is nourished by religion in a good way. So all good religions must come forward to push forward this argument that you are really committed to yourself, to your creator, to all lot of society, that peace should in all respects be restored and should be maintained. I congratulate Wani Sahab and his team and Institute of Objective Studies that way, that we had got very good deliberations and very good resolutions that we had arrived at. Thank you very much.
Professor Zadem Khan Saab, for your words of wisdom, appreciation, and suggestion and advice. I think they have to be taken very seriously. And I am reminded of the fact then when Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was telling to the world that you follow human dignity principles, you get world peace. Then the first martyr then was a lady, Ammar. And the first lady was also, who accepted the message of peace, was also a lady, Khadija. And then later on, the lady who gave the best of the judges to the world was also a lady, the sister of Umar. And then we had good presentations during this conference, and now we want to bring it to its conclusion for another beginning by Professor Dr. Hasina Hashia. She is the Assistant Secretary General of IOS and a good geographer. She has been associated with Jamia Millia Islamia and also with many of the institutions and ministries regarding many projects. She is a very good researcher, and she is trained in empiricism, and therefore takes things very meticulously, and at the same time, as an empiricist, she is very keen in pointing out even the smallest points and errors, and that's how we have in her a very good scholar. I request Professor Hasina Hashia, Madam, to please propose the vote of thanks for this conference. Professor Hasina Hashia.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Professor Wani Saab, for your kind words. Good afternoon to all. This is now, Alhamdulillah, the 2 days international conference of IAS came to an end successfully. And this is the time that we should thank and pay our gratitude to everybody who remained involved directly or indirectly in this conference and worked for this, for the success of this conference. On behalf of Institute of Objective Studies and its whole staff, both managerial as well as administrative, I pay my sincere thanks to all the presenters of the conference, whether national or international. I want to make the special mention of the international presenters who presented very valuable papers and and gave us the very valuable contribution for this conference. I want to make the mention of Professor Dr. Bruce W. Dayton from USA, Dr. Anna Pantido from Sydney, Australia, Professor Zaliha Kamruddin from Malaysia, Professor Batul Zohur Qazi from Maldives, and Professor Jayampati from Sri Lanka, and Dr. Azim Ahmed Khan from USA. We are so thankful to all of you for your presentations in various capacities, like the special papers, all the inaugural and the valedictory addresses. We pay our sincere thanks to all of you. I am very much grateful to all the chairpersons of the technical sessions, like Professor Zadem Khan Saab and our Madam Zaliha Kamruddin from Malaysia. I want to mention here Professor Zaliha Kamruddin, when she was rector of the IAUM, she hosted a very good, very grand conference. A topic was role of women in global peace building, and it was attended by about 400 women delegates from all over the globe. So I think this topic is very close to her heart, and we are thankful to her also, because she was for the full day she was with us yesterday. Thank you so much. I also it is my duty to pay sincere thanks to all the national scholars from Delhi, from various universities of Delhi, from Aligarh Muslim University, from various universities of West Bengal, from University of Rajasthan, and other parts of the country. My heartfelt thanks are due to Professor Muhammad Afzal Wani, the convener of this international conference, for his constant efforts, because it is these efforts that this event has become so successful. We are very much thankful to you, sir. I want to pay my special thanks to the chairman of Institute of Objective Studies, because for his constant support and inspirational attitude, and also to the Secretary General of the IAS, Professor Zadem Khan, for his academic contributions. Last but not least, I want to pay my sincere thanks to all the this staff of Institute of Objective Studies, whether technical or non-technical, for their tireless efforts. And it was only possible to hold this international seminar. And finally, I want to thank once again all of you. Let us hope for the global peace in the years to come. Thank you very much.